My name is Luna Phelan, and I'm 29 years old. 12 hours before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my younger sister sent my fiancé fabricated photos of me cheating. She hired an actor, dragged him to my hotel room door, and staged an entire betrayal while I was inside writing my wedding vows. At 11 o'clock that night, my fiancé called me sobbing, canceled our $4,000 wedding, and hung up on me. When I called my mother in a panic, she sighed and told me he was out of my league anyway. I was entirely alone. But my sister made one critical mistake. She forgot to check the hallway ceiling for security cameras. The next morning, I put on my silk gown. I walked down the aisle, but I did not go to get married. I went to the altar to hijack the audio-visual system and play that security footage on a 20-foot projector screen in front of 200 guests, including my sister's own fiancé. Before I tell you what happened when the screens dropped from the ceiling, please take a moment to like and subscribe to Sophia Told Stories, but only if this kind of justice resonates with you. Also, drop your age and where you are watching from in the comments. I want to know who is listening right now. Now let me take you back to the night before the wedding, inside a quiet suite at the Plaza Hotel in Chicago, and the phone call that set my reality on fire. It was 11 o'clock on a Friday. The city traffic hummed 14 floors below my window. I stood by the minibar with a glass of ice water, reading over my handwritten vows one last time. I felt peaceful. I felt ready. Then my phone rang. Julian's name flashed across the screen. I answered with a smile, expecting a late-night confession of wedding jitters or a quiet "I love you." Instead, I heard ragged, uneven breathing. He was gasping for air. "Julian, what is wrong?" I asked. The ice in my glass clinked against the crystal rim as my fingers began to tremble. "Vanessa showed me," he choked out. His voice was raw and stripped of its usual warmth. The photos, the texts. "How could you do this to me, Luna?" My stomach plummeted. "What are you talking about? What did my sister show you?" "It is over," he whispered. "Do not bother showing up tomorrow." The line went dead. I stood frozen with the phone still pressed to my ear. I tried calling him back. Once. Twice. 5 times. Every attempt went straight to voicemail. Before I could even process the fracture in my reality, the screen lit up with a new notification. A text message from my younger sister, Vanessa. It was not an explanation. It was not an apology. It was a single, glowing, smiley face emoji. My knees gave out. I sank onto the cold marble floor of the bathroom, the chill seeping through my thin robe. My hands shook so badly, I dropped the phone twice before dialing my mother's number. She answered on the 4th ring, her tone clipped and annoyed by the late interruption. "Mom," I gasped, fighting to pull oxygen into my lungs. "Julian just called. He canceled the wedding. He said Vanessa sent him something. Photos." A long, heavy sigh echoed through the speaker. It sounded rehearsed. It sounded exhausted by my very existence. "Well, Luna," she said, her voice devoid of any maternal concern, "maybe it is for the best, honey. You know Julian was a bit out of your league anyway." We all thought so. Out of my league? Mom, she set me up. I did not do anything. "Do not start creating drama the night before a major event," she scolded, speaking to me as if I had merely spilled red wine on a white tablecloth. "Vanessa is very sensitive right now. Let us just call the caterer in the morning and go home." She hung up on me. I should have expected the dismissal. When I received my college acceptance letter years ago, Vanessa threw a calculated tantrum and purposefully backed her sedan into my parked car. My parents spent that entire semester consoling her for the trauma of the deployed airbag, ignoring my achievements entirely. My happiness was always an insult to her ego. I sat on that bathroom floor for 2 hours. The tears eventually dried, leaving behind a hollow, aching silence in my chest. At 1:15 in the morning, the phone screen illuminated the dark tiles once more. It was an email from Maya, my maid of honor. Her brother managed the security detail for the hotel. The subject line read, "Do not cry. Look at this." Attached was a heavy video file. I tapped the screen and watched the loading circle spin. What I saw in those next 30 seconds turned the ice in my veins into fire. The screen of my phone illuminated the dark bathroom tiles with a pale blue glow. Maya never sent emails at 1 a.m. unless the world was ending. Her brother David ran the security detail for the Plaza Hotel. He oversaw a network of 200 cameras spanning the entire historic property. Earlier that evening, David noticed an anomaly on the 4th floor feed, the exact corridor where my bridal suite was located. He pulled the archive, saw what transpired, and bypassed protocol to send the raw footage directly to his sister. Maya forwarded it to me with a subject line that felt like a lifeline. "Do not cry. Look at this." I tapped the attachment. The media player loaded. A red timestamp blinked in the upper right corner of the frame. 9:00 p.m. Just 2 hours before Julian called me in tears. The footage was grainy but rendered in crisp, high-definition black and white. The long, patterned carpet of the hallway stretched out, empty for a few seconds. Then, the elevator doors at the far end parted. 2 figures stepped out. One was a woman wearing a familiar tailored blazer and holding a distinct quilted leather handbag. Even without color, I knew the posture, the arrogant tilt of the chin, the purposeful stride. It was Vanessa, my younger sister, the woman who was supposed to be a bridesmaid, standing beside me in 12 hours. Walking half a step behind her was a tall man. He wore a dark baseball cap, pulled low over his face, and a heavy jacket, despite the mild Chicago weather. His hands were shoved deep into his pockets. He walked with a slight, uneven limp on his left side, a college sports injury that never healed right. My breath hitched in my throat. I recognized that walk instantly. It was Derek. Derek and I dated briefly 3 years ago. The relationship ended when I realized he possessed a severe gambling habit and a chronic inability to tell the truth. After we broke up, he spiraled. He ended up borrowing money from anyone who would answer his calls, including Vanessa. Last I heard, he owed her $5,000. I watched the screen, my heart hammering a chaotic rhythm against my ribs. Vanessa marched down the corridor and stopped precisely in front of suite 412, my room. I was inside at that exact moment, sitting on the edge of the bed, writing my vows, oblivious to the betrayal unfolding 3 feet away on the other side of the oak door. Vanessa turned to Derek and pointed at the floor panel directly in front of my door. He stepped onto the spot. Then the performance began. My sister transformed into a film director. She reached out and grabbed the collar of his jacket, yanking it down off his shoulder. She unbuttoned the top 3 buttons of his dress shirt, exposing his bare chest. She reached up and wildly ruffled his hair, destroying the neat style to make him look disheveled, sweaty, and rushed. Derek leaned against my doorframe, tilting his head back, feigning a look of exhausted satisfaction. Vanessa stepped back, pulled her phone from her quilted bag, and crouched low to the carpet. She snapped a photo, then another. She moved to the left, capturing an angle that highlighted my gold room number gleaming on the wood paneling, right next to his half-naked torso. From that specific perspective, it looked exactly like a man stumbling out of my hotel room after an illicit, passionate encounter. The sheer calculation of it made my stomach churn. She reviewed the images on her screen, nodded in approval, and then did something that cemented her guilt forever. She opened her designer bag, pulled out a thick white envelope, and shoved it into Derek's chest. He opened the flap, checked the stack of bills inside, and gave her a sharp nod. A transaction. She paid him to help frame me. He turned and walked toward the emergency stairwell, disappearing from the frame. Vanessa smoothed her blazer, checked her reflection in the brass elevator doors, and rode down to the lobby. The video ended. The screen faded to black. The silence in my bathroom felt different now. It was no longer the silence of a victim. It was the quiet calm before a storm. I played the footage a second time, then a third. I studied every frame, every micro expression of my sister orchestrating my ruin. She did not look guilty. She looked triumphant. Maya was not just a bridesmaid. She worked as a senior cybersecurity analyst for a financial firm downtown. While her brother managed the physical security, Maya understood the digital footprint. In her email, she included a brief note stating she was already tracing the origin of the burner number that sent Julian the messages. She promised to have the data packet ready before breakfast. I possessed both the physical proof and the digital trail. The evidence was irrefutable. This was not a sudden crime of passion. This was a premeditated execution of my future. And the most terrifying part was that it fit a lifelong pattern. Vanessa never simply wanted to succeed. She needed me to fail. I closed my eyes and leaned the back of my head against the cool tile wall. Memories surfaced, sharp and stinging. Years ago, I received my acceptance letter to Northwestern University. It was a full academic scholarship. I ran downstairs down parents, practically vibrating with pride. 10 minutes later, Vanessa, furious that the spotlight had shifted away from her upcoming high school dance, grabbed the keys to her sedan. She backed her car straight into my parked vehicle in the driveway, hard enough to deploy the airbags and shatter the windshield. Instead of celebrating my scholarship, my parents spent the entire semester hovering over Vanessa. They paid for her physical therapy for a phantom neck ache. They bought her a new car to ease her anxiety about driving. They ignored my tuition forms and my orientation dates. Vanessa learned a very dangerous lesson that day. She learned that sabotage is rewarded. She learned that my parents would always shield her from the consequences of her own malice as long as she played the victim. She spent her entire life stealing my achievements. Now she was trying to steal my future husband. She wanted to stand in the front row of my wedding and watch my life implode, playing the role of the supportive, grieving sister while hiding the matches she used to burn my house down. The tears that had stained my cheeks for the past 2 hours dried up. A strange, unfamiliar heat bloomed in my chest. It was not sorrow, it was sheer, unadulterated fury. For 29 years, I had kept the peace. I swallowed the unfairness. I played the role of the bigger person because it was easier than fighting a war against my own blood. I let her take the center stage while I built my life quietly in the background. But she crossed a line tonight. She dragged the man I loved into her theater of cruelty. She manipulated his insecurities. She used his trust in her as a weapon against me. Julian was collateral damage in her lifelong crusade to ensure I possessed nothing she could not control or destroy. I stood up from the bathroom floor. My legs were steady. I walked over to the mirror and looked at my reflection. My mascara was smeared, my eyes red and swollen. I turned on the faucet and splashed freezing water over my face, washing away the evidence of my despair. I had a choice to make. I could forward this video to Julian right now. I could call him, beg him to watch it, and pray he believed his own eyes over the fabricated screenshots. I could march down the hall to my sister's suite, kick the door open, and demand an explanation in private. I could handle this quietly, preserve the family dignity, and try to salvage the wedding schedule. But preserving the family dignity meant protecting Vanessa. It meant giving her a chance to spin another lie, to cry to our mother, to twist the narrative until somehow I became the villain again. If you caught your own sister framing you for infidelity the night before your wedding, what would you do? Would you confront her behind closed doors and demand an apology? Or would you let her burn in the fire she started? Drop a comment below. Tell me what you would choose. I made my choice. I chose the ashes. I did not call Julian back. I did not confront my sister. I walked back into the bedroom, plugged my phone into the charger, and climbed into the vast, empty, king-sized bed. I set my alarm for 6 a.m. I was going to need my rest. The hair and makeup team would be arriving soon. When the sun rose over the Chicago skyline, I was going to put on my bridal gown. I was going to smile for the cameras. I was going to play the part of the blissfully ignorant bride, right up until the moment the trap snapped shut. My sister thought she was the director of this tragedy. She had no idea I just rewrote the entire script. The sun breached the horizon over Lake Michigan, casting a pale, cold light across my hotel suite. My alarm buzzed at 6 a.m. I reached out and silenced it, my hands steady. I checked my phone. 0 missed calls. 0 new messages from the man who promised to spend his life with me. Any other bride would have shattered all over again. I felt a strange, crystalline clarity settle into my bones. At 7 sharp, a sharp knock rattled the suite door. I unlocked it to find my hair and makeup team standing in the hallway, armed with rolling cases and ring lights. I greeted them with a bright, manufactured smile. I directed them to set up near the floor-to-ceiling windows. They unpacked curling irons, setting sprays, and makeup palettes, filling the quiet room with the bustling, optimistic energy of a wedding morning. I poured myself a mimosa, took a seat in the plush leather styling chair, and allowed them to begin their work. I became a canvas. I closed my eyes as the makeup artist applied foundation, concealing the faint shadows of my sleepless night. I needed to look flawless. I needed to look like a woman who possessed not a single care in the world. At 8 a.m, the suite door swung open again. Vanessa strolled in. She wore a custom blush silk bridesmaid robe, her hair already blown out into perfect cascading waves. She carried a steaming cup of coffee and an air of unmistakable arrogance. I watched her through the reflection of my vanity mirror. Her eyes immediately darted toward my face, searching for the swollen, red-rimmed evidence of a midnight panic attack. She expected to find me huddled in a corner, frantically dialing Julian's number, begging my family to help me fix a broken engagement. Instead, she found me sipping champagne while a stylist expertly pinned a sweeping updo into my hair. "Morning, V," I said. My voice was light, airy, and entirely unbothered. Vanessa stopped in her tracks. Her manicured fingers tightened around her coffee cup. "Good morning," she replied, her tone cautious. She walked over and perched on the edge of the sofa, crossing her legs. She kept glancing at my phone, which sat face down on the vanity counter. "Did you sleep well?" "Like a rock," I lied flawlessly. "I feel fantastic." A flicker of confusion crossed her face. Vanessa operated on a very specific psychological currency. She needed reactions. She required other people to be off balance so she could feel secure. When we were children, if she broke one of my toys, she would hover nearby, waiting for my tears. If I did not cry, she would grow anxious and irritable. My calm demeanor this morning was short-circuiting her internal script. She clearly assumed Julian had followed her fabricated evidence to its logical conclusion and ended our relationship. My serenity made no sense to her. "Have you talked to Julian today?" she probed, unable to hide the sharp edge of curiosity in her voice. I smiled at my reflection as the makeup artist applied a soft pink gloss to my lips. "He is probably busy with his groomsmen. You know how chaotic the morning of a wedding can get." Vanessa shifted uncomfortably on the sofa. She pulled out her own phone, her thumbs flying across the screen. She was likely texting her hired actor, Derek, demanding to know if he had heard anything, or perhaps double-checking the fake burner account to ensure the messages had gone through. I watched her panic brew silently. At 9 a.m, the door opened a third time. My mother, Brenda, waltzed into the suite. She carried a silver tray laden with fresh, warm pastries. The rich scent of butter, flaky croissants, and powdered sugar filled the room. She walked right past the styling chair, bypassing the bride entirely, and set the tray down on the coffee table directly in front of Vanessa. "I brought you a little something, sweetheart," Mom cooed, brushing a stray lock of hair behind Vanessa's ear. "I know how low your blood sugar gets when you are stressed." Vanessa smiled, her smug confidence returning now that her primary enabler had arrived. "Thank you, Mom." I sat in my chair, my stomach empty, watching the two of them share a quiet, exclusionary moment. This was the dynamic that defined my entire existence. I was the afterthought. I was the backdrop against which my sister was allowed to shine. Mom never asked if I was hungry. She never asked if I felt nervous about reciting my vows in front of 200 people. Instead, Mom straightened her posture, smoothed her tailored mother-of-the-bride dress, and shot me a sideways, calculating glance. "Julian is not answering his phone," Mom announced casually. Her voice carried a feigned, dramatic concern. "His mother just texted me. Apparently, he locked himself in his room and will not speak to anyone. Are you sure there is not an issue, Luna?" Mom was fishing. She was waiting for the cancellation confirmation. She wanted the disaster to become public so she could pivot into crisis mode, a role she relished because it allowed her to control the narrative. She wanted my failure to become the main event, a spectacular train wreck that would validate her lifelong belief that I was destined to fall short. I met my mother's gaze in the mirror. I did not blink. "Everything is exactly as it should be, Mom," I said. The chilling certainty in my voice made her flinch. She frowned, clearly unsettled by my lack of hysteria, and retreated to the corner of the room to whisper furiously with Vanessa. At 10 o'clock, Maya arrived. My maid of honor walked into the suite carrying my dress bag. She bypassed my mother and sister without a single word of greeting. Maya stepped up to my chair and handed me a small velvet box. We exchanged a silent, heavy look. The digital forensic report was done. The trap was set. I opened the velvet box. Inside rested a pair of vintage diamond drop earrings. Julian had given them to me the night of our rehearsal dinner, claiming they symbolized his unwavering promise to protect our future. I lifted the earrings from the velvet cushion and slipped them into my ears. The metal felt ice cold against my skin. The stones carried a heavy, undeniable weight. They represented a promise Julian had broken at the very first sign of adversity. He chose to believe a pixelated lie over the woman he asked to marry. He convicted me without a trial. I reached for my phone. I opened my text thread with Julian. The last message from him was a heart emoji sent yesterday afternoon. The contrast between that digital affection and his midnight betrayal tasted bitter. I typed out a single sentence. "I know what she showed you. Meet me at the altar or lose me forever." I hit send. I did not elaborate. I did not plead my case. I delivered an ultimatum. I was gambling my entire relationship, my entire future, on the sheer hope that Julian's fundamental love for me would override the fabricated evidence burning a hole in his mind. If he did not show up, I would still walk down that aisle and expose Vanessa to the crowd. But I needed to know if the man I loved possessed a spine. I needed to know if he was brave enough to face me. It was time to get dressed. Maya unzipped the garment bag. The silk of my wedding gown cascaded to the floor, a pristine column of ivory fabric. I stepped into the dress. Maya pulled the zipper up my spine. The mechanical sound of the metal interlocking felt less like a bridal preparation and more like a weapon locking into place. The silk hugged my ribs, feeling like impenetrable armor. I turned to face the floor-to-ceiling mirror. The woman looking back at me was not a fragile bride hoping for a fairy tale. Her jaw was set. Her eyes were dark and calculating. "Luna, we need to head down to the staging area," Maya said quietly, adjusting the long train of my gown. "The guests are taking their seats." Vanessa stood up, brushing pastry crumbs from her lap. She adjusted her designer clutch, her face a mask of predatory anticipation. She was ready to watch me crumble at the altar when the groom failed to appear. Mom checked her reflection, oblivious to the fact that her carefully constructed world was about to detonate. "Let us go," I said. I walked out of the suite, the heavy silk of my train dragging across the carpet. I heard the faint strains of classical music drifting up from the grand ballroom below. 200 friends, family members, and colleagues were sitting in gilded chairs, waiting to witness a union of love and trust. They were going to witness something far more profound. I was not walking down the aisle to get married. I was walking down the aisle to go to war. The corridor outside the grand ballroom felt cold, devoid of the usual frantic joy that accompanies a wedding procession. The heavy oak doors stood closed, hiding the 200 guests waiting inside. The faint, melodic notes of a string quartet tuning their instruments drifted through the thick wood. The scent of fresh white roses and eucalyptus hung in the chilled air, a floral arrangement I had selected months ago. Maya stood beside me, adjusting the long train of my silk gown, her presence a silent, steadfast pillar of support. My father, Richard, was scheduled to be standing on my right side. We rehearsed this exact moment yesterday afternoon. He was supposed to link his arm through mine, offer a reassuring smile, and walk his eldest daughter down the pristine white aisle. Instead, he approached me 5 minutes before the music started, his expression tight and dismissive. He offered a weak, improvised excuse about Vanessa wearing unfamiliar stilettos, claiming the polished marble floors posed a hazard to her ankles. He turned his back on me, linked his arm through my sister's, and guided her toward the front row. He abandoned me at the threshold of my own wedding to cater to her fabricated fragility. This was not an isolated incident. Richard spent his entire life functioning as a secondary enabler to my mother's blatant favoritism. When I graduated from college with honors, he skipped the ceremony because Vanessa claimed she suffered a severe migraine and needed someone to fetch her medication. He always chose the path of least resistance, and in our family hierarchy, resisting Vanessa meant enduring weeks of manufactured crisis. So he accommodated her, every single time. The heavy oak doors swung open. The string quartet began playing Canon in D. 200 friends, colleagues, and extended relatives rose from their gilded chairs. The collective rustle of expensive fabrics filled the cavernous, vaulted room. Flashes from smartphone cameras blinked in the peripheral shadows. The white carpet felt impossibly long. My heels sank slightly into the plush fabric with every step. The venue was a historic bank converted into a luxury event space, featuring soaring arched ceilings, intricate gold leaf molding, and towering stained glass windows. I chose this location because it felt timeless, rooted in a strength that my own upbringing lacked. Walking past the rows of mahogany chairs, I noted the faces of my colleagues from the public relations agency. They handled corporate scandals for a living. They recognized the subtle markers of a crisis unfolding in real time. Their eyes tracked my solo progression with sharp, professional curiosity. I stepped onto the white carpet. I walked down the aisle alone. My spine remained straight, my chin held high. I did not look at the pitying faces of my extended family. I fixed my gaze on the altar waiting at the end of the path. Julian was there. He received my morning ultimatum. He showed up. But the man standing beneath the floral archway looked like a hollow replica of my fiancé. Julian began as a senior corporate architect. He built his career on logic, structural integrity, and measurable facts. He was a man who required blueprints to understand the world. Last night, Vanessa handed him a forged blueprint of my infidelity, and his foundation crumbled. His posture, usually confident and broad, collapsed inward. His tuxedo jacket hung rigidly on his shoulders. Dark, bruised circles shadowed the delicate skin beneath his eyes, mapping out a sleepless night of agony. The muscle in his jaw feathered with suppressed tension. He stared at a random spot on the marble floor, refusing to lift his chin. He would not meet my eyes. I reached the end of the aisle. Maya stepped forward, gently taking my heavy bouquet of peonies. I turned to face the man I loved, the man I still hoped possessed the courage to seek the truth. I extended my left hand. I offered my palm, waiting for him to close the physical gap between us, waiting for the familiar warmth of his fingers interlocking with mine. He recoiled. Julian pulled his hand back, tucking it sharply against his side, as if my touch might burn him. He squeezed his eyes shut, a silent grimace twisting his features. His chest heaved. He looked like a man standing before a firing squad. When he pulled his hand away from mine, the physical distance between us felt like a chasm. I could see the rapid pulse beating frantically at the base of his throat. He wore the custom silver cufflinks I gifted him on our anniversary, small reminders of a history he was ready to discard based on a digital illusion. The betrayal stung, sharp and bitter. But I refused to let it break my composure. I had spent hours cultivating this calm. A sharp intake of breath swept through the seated crowd. The rejection was undeniable. 200 people witnessed the groom refuse the bride at the altar. A ripple of shock vibrated through the room. Whispers ignited among the pews, spreading like dry brush catching fire. The carefully curated elegance of the ceremony shattered into uncomfortable, tense confusion. I glanced down at the front row on the left side of the aisle. My mother sat frozen, her lips pursed, her eyes darting around the room as she calculated the social damage of this public embarrassment. Beside her, Vanessa orchestrated her own performance. She pulled a delicate, vintage lace handkerchief from her designer clutch. She dabbed at perfectly dry eyes, leaning over to whisper something into my mother's ear. Her face contorted into a tragic, sympathetic pout. She was playing the heartbroken sibling, mourning the sudden collapse of her sister's relationship. It was a flawless, sickening display of theatrical grief. On the opposite side of the aisle, Julian's parents sat in rigid silence. His mother gripped her evening bag with white knuckles, her gaze fixed on her son with intense, protective concern. They knew something was terribly wrong, but they lacked the context. They only saw a broken man rejecting a woman he claimed to adore just 24 hours prior. The officiant, a kind older gentleman with silver hair, stepped forward. He adjusted his glasses, clearing his throat in a desperate attempt to cut through the mounting, suffocating tension. He opened his leather-bound book, his hands trembling slightly. "Dearly beloved," he began, his voice wavering, echoing through the silent microphone. "Wait," I said. My voice did not require amplification to reach the back of the room. The single syllable cut through the thick atmosphere like a freshly sharpened blade. The officiant froze, his mouth hovering open. The string quartet had ceased playing minutes ago, but now even the ambient noise of shifting chairs and rustling programs vanished. The silence turned heavy, expectant, and dangerous. I turned my back to the officiant. I faced the audience. I looked right at Julian. His eyes snapped open. He finally met my gaze, his expression a chaotic mixture of profound betrayal and desperate confusion. I held his stare for 3 agonizing seconds, ensuring he understood the gravity of the precipice we were standing upon. Then I shifted my focus. I looked down at the front row. I locked eyes with Vanessa. When I locked eyes with my sister, I saw the exact moment her internal narrative fractured. Vanessa always thrived in the shadows of manipulation. She preferred to orchestrate disasters and then watch the fallout from a safe, comfortable distance, usually wrapped in my mother's comforting embrace. Being thrust into the glaring spotlight of direct confrontation was her ultimate nightmare. Her fake, sympathetic pout faltered. The lace handkerchief stalled midair. Her manicured fingers dug into the fabric of her blush gown. Her jaw tightened. Her posture went rigid, the smug confidence suddenly draining from her shoulders. She recognized the cold, unyielding calculation in my expression. She realized I was not going to cry. I was not going to beg Julian for forgiveness. I was not playing my assigned role in her tragedy. She shot a panicked, desperate look toward the venue exit, calculating the distance between her front row seat and the sanctuary of the hallway. "Before we take any vows," I announced, my voice ringing clear and steady off the marble pillars, "I think we need to clear the air about what my fiancé was sent last night." The silence in the room transformed. It ceased being mere quiet. It became deafening. It became the breathless pause before a detonation. 200 guests sat immobilized, waiting for the spark to hit the powder keg. I took a slow, deep breath, preparing to tear down the facade my family had spent decades building. The echo of my voice faded into the vaulted ceiling of the venue. The 200 guests seated in the mahogany chairs remained paralyzed. Nobody coughed, nobody shifted their weight. The tension in the room morphed into a tangible entity, pressing down on the collective chest of the audience. Julian stared at me, his brow furrowed in a portrait of pure confusion. He opened his mouth to speak, perhaps to demand an explanation or to beg me to stop, but the words died in his throat. He lacked the foundation to challenge me. Down in the front row, the carefully constructed facade of my family began to crack. My mother leaned forward, her pearls clicking softly against her collarbone. She shot a warning glare in my direction, a silent command to cease this rebellion and return to the script she and Vanessa had written for my life. Beside her, Vanessa gripped the edges of her delicate lace handkerchief. Her knuckles turned stark white. She recognized the shift in the atmosphere. She knew I possessed a piece of information she could not control, but she remained unaware of the magnitude of her impending ruin. "Luna, what are you doing?" Vanessa hissed. Her voice was low, designed to travel only to the altar, but the acoustics of the historic bank carried her venomous tone to the first 3 rows. "Stop making a scene." I ignored her. I did not grant her the dignity of a response. My gaze remained locked on the audience, anchored in the truth I was about to unleash. "Maya," I said quietly. My maid of honor did not hesitate. Maya possessed the calm, methodical precision of a woman who disassembled digital threats for a living. She stepped forward, standing shoulder to shoulder with me at the altar. She looked down at her elaborate bouquet of white peonies and eucalyptus. With her free hand, she reached into the center of the floral arrangement. She bypassed the silk ribbons and the thorny stems, extracting a small, rectangular black remote control she had tucked inside the blooms earlier that morning. She pointed the remote toward the back of the grand ballroom and pressed a single button. A sudden mechanical whir sliced through the suffocating quiet. High above our heads, concealed within the intricate gold leaf molding of the arched ceiling, motorized gears ground to life. The guests collectively gasped, tilting their heads upward. 2 towering canvas projection screens began a slow, deliberate descent behind the altar. These screens were originally installed to display a heartwarming montage of childhood photographs during the reception. They were supposed to project images of Julian and me smiling on vacations, celebrating birthdays, and building a life together. Today, they served a far more clinical purpose. They were the instruments of my exoneration. The heavy white canvases locked into place with a definitive thud, forming a dual backdrop behind Julian and me. High in the balcony, the dual projectors flared to life. Twin beams of harsh, brilliant light cut through the ambient dust of the ballroom, hitting the screens with a bright flash. Julian stepped back, stumbling slightly over the hem of my silk train. He looked at the glowing white rectangles, his confusion deepening into a profound, creeping dread. The screens flickered. The bright white canvas dissolved into the stark, grainy grayscale of a security camera feed. A bright red timestamp pulsed in the upper right corner of the projection, 9:00 p.m. The date listed was yesterday. The location displayed in the lower left corner read Plaza Hotel, 4th floor corridor. A low murmur rippled through the seated guests. They recognized the iconic patterned carpet of the hotel where the bridal party had stayed. They watched the empty black and white hallway stretch out across 20 feet of canvas. For 5 agonizing seconds, nothing happened. The audience sat captivated, watching a silent stage. Then, the elevator doors at the far end of the projected corridor slid open. 2 figures stepped into the frame. The resolution was crisp. The lighting was unforgiving. The towering screens magnified every detail for the 200 people sitting in the pews. The woman leading the way wore a tailored blazer and carried a distinctive, quilted leather handbag. Even stripped of color, her identity was irrefutable. It was Vanessa, my sister. The woman currently sitting in the front row, wearing a blush gown and clutching a handkerchief. The murmurs in the ballroom escalated into a sharp, collective intake of breath. My colleagues from the Public Relations Agency leaned forward, their eyes widening as they recognized the subject on the screen. Julian turned his head, staring at the projection. His jaw dropped. Following closely behind Vanessa on the screen was a tall man wearing a baseball cap pulled low over his brow. He walked with a slight limp. It was Derek, the man Vanessa had claimed I invited into my suite. The security footage possessed no audio. The silence made the pantomime playing out on the screens infinitely more damning. The audience watched like captive witnesses to a silent film detailing a calculated assassination. On the screen, Vanessa marched down the corridor and stopped directly in front of my suite. The gold numbers on the door were clearly visible. She turned to Derek and gestured to the floor panel directly in front of the wood frame. Derek stepped onto the designated mark. A wave of disjointed gasps and sharp whispers erupted from the wedding guests. They were watching the architect of a lie go to work. The 20-foot Vanessa on the screen reached out and grabbed the collar of Derek's jacket, yanking it down his arm. She reached for the top buttons of his dress shirt, pulling the fabric apart to expose his chest. She reached up with both hands and ruffled his hair, destroying his neat appearance to fabricate a look of disheveled exhaustion. Julian stood frozen beside me. The color drained from his face, leaving his skin a sickly ashen gray. His chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow bursts. He reached into the inner pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his cell phone. His hands shook violently. He unlocked the screen, pulling up the photo he received the night before. He looked down at the image on his glowing screen, and then he looked up at the towering projection behind me. He watched the real-time creation of the lie that broke him. On the projection, Vanessa stepped back from Derek. She crouched low to the patterned carpet, pulled out her cell phone, and angled the lens upward. She snapped the photograph. She adjusted her position, framing the shot to include my room number beside his half-naked torso. Down in the front row, reality crashed into the present-day Vanessa. She scrambled to her feet, her chair scraping harshly against the marble floor. Her blush silk dress tangled around her ankles. Her face was a portrait of unadulterated terror. The smug, untouchable confidence she had worn her entire life evaporated in a single heartbeat. She looked like a ghost trapped in designer clothing. "Turn it off!" Vanessa shrieked. Her voice cracked, hitting a high, hysterical pitch that echoed painfully through the venue. "Turn it off right now!" I did not move. Maya held the remote loosely by her side, her face an unreadable mask of calm defiance. The projection continued its silent, relentless testimony. On the screen, the digital Vanessa stood up. She reviewed the photograph on her device, nodded in deep satisfaction, and opened her quilted handbag. She retrieved a thick, white envelope. She shoved the envelope into Derek's hands. He opened the flap, revealing a dense stack of cash. He nodded, pocketed the money, and walked toward the emergency exit stairwell. The transaction was complete. The premeditation was proven. The audience erupted. The noise in the ballroom swelled into a chaotic symphony of disbelief. Julian's parents stood up from their seats, pointing at the screen, their faces contorted in outrage. My extended family members covered their mouths in shock. The quiet elegance of the wedding ceremony descended into a courtroom of public opinion, and the jury had just reached an instantaneous verdict. Julian stared at the envelope of cash on the screen. The realization hit him like a physical blow to the sternum. He staggered backward, gripping the edge of the floral archway to keep himself upright. The foundation of his truth splintered. The woman he loved did not betray him. The woman sitting in the front row had orchestrated his agony for sport. Vanessa spun around to face the audience. Her eyes were wide, darting frantically across the sea of disgusted faces. She sought a lifeline. She sought my mother, who sat frozen in her chair, unable to comprehend the visual evidence dismantling her golden child. "That is deep-faked," Vanessa screamed, pointing a trembling finger at the towering screens. "She faked this. It is a manipulation. She is trying to frame me because she is jealous." Her desperation was palpable. Throughout our childhood, Vanessa escaped consequences by weaving intricate webs of verbal deceit. She would cry, point fingers, and twist the narrative until my parents surrendered to her version of reality. She forged report cards and blamed the teachers. She stole money from my father's wallet and blamed the housekeeper. She always possessed an excuse. But a time-stamped, high-definition security feed extracted directly from the hotel mainframe did not argue. It did not negotiate. It simply displayed the irrefutable truth. She hired a video editor, Vanessa wailed, her voice growing hoarse. Julian, you cannot believe this. She is a public relations expert. She fabricates things for a living. The guests fell silent again, their attention snapping back and forth between the hysterical bridesmaid in the front row and the calm, silent bride standing at the altar. Vanessa was banking on the slim possibility that the sheer audacity of her defense might plant a seed of doubt. She hoped her frantic denial would muddy the waters just enough to force a retreat. I let her scream. I let her flail in the trap she had built for me. I stood perfectly still, allowing the silence of my demeanor to contrast with her manic explosion. When her shrieks finally dissolved into ragged, panicked breathing, I stepped closer to the edge of the altar. I was not done yet. The video proved she staged the photograph, but Julian had received texts as well, messages that appeared to come from my old phone number. To truly dismantle my sister's web, I needed to expose the digital architecture of her treason. I reached into the hidden pocket of my silk gown, my fingers closing around the folded stack of forensic reports Maya had delivered that morning. I had one more card to play, and it was going to leave a permanent mark. Deep faked, I echoed. The word hung in the chilled air of the grand ballroom, pathetic and hollow. I reached down into the hidden, reinforced seam of my ivory silk gown. My fingers bypassed the layers of tulle and found the folded stack of printer paper Maya had handed me earlier that morning in the bridal suite. I withdrew the documents and held them up. The stark white pages contrasted sharply against the soft fabric of my dress. I turned my attention back to the shivering woman in the front row. You always underestimated the people around you, Vanessa. You thought you could hire an amateur actor, purchase a prepaid burner phone, and orchestrate my destruction without leaving a digital footprint. You assumed everyone else possessed the same superficial understanding of the world that you do. But you forgot one crucial detail. Maya is not just a bridesmaid holding a bouquet of peonies. She is a senior cybersecurity analyst for a downtown financial firm. She hunts digital ghosts for a living. I unfolded the documents. The crisp snap of the thick paper echoed through the silent venue. I turned to Julian. He was still staring at the paused video feed on the canvas, but his eyes snapped down to the pages in my hand. The text messages you received last night did not come from me, Julian, I explained. My voice remained steady, projecting clearly across the mahogany pews so every guest could hear the forensic breakdown of the treason. The sender used a sophisticated spoofing software to mimic my old cellular number. It is a common, cowardly tactic. But spoofing software requires a stable internet connection to bridge the fake number to the cellular towers. Every connection leaves a trace. I stepped closer to him, offering the top page. Julian hesitated for a fraction of a second, then reached out with trembling fingers to take the document. Maya tracked the origin of those messages, I continued. The data packets were routed through a virtual private network. It was a cheap, commercially available service. Maya bypassed the standard encryption protocols in less than 20 minutes. She traced the protocol address directly back to its source hardware. She ran a cross-reference on the geolocation data. Those flirty, damning texts you read last night were sent from the wireless router located in apartment 4B of the Harper Building. I paused, letting the specific address sink into the minds of everyone listening. It was Vanessa's apartment. Down in the front row, a new kind of chaos erupted. It was not Vanessa this time. It was my mother. Brenda scrambled out of her gilded chair. Her sudden, frantic movement caused her heavy pearl necklace to rattle sharply against her collarbone. The polite country club poise she maintained for 6 decades vanished in an instant. She looked like a trapped animal. She realized the digital proof was bulletproof. She knew she could not gaslight a server log or charm a forensic report into disappearing. "Luna, stop this instantly," my mother shrieked. Her voice cracked, hitting a harsh frequency that bounced off the stained glass windows. "You are humiliating this family." She did not walk toward the altar to comfort her crying youngest daughter. She lunged toward the ornate wood paneling of the ballroom wall. She dropped to her knees in her expensive designer gown, her manicured hands scraping along the baseboards. She frantically searched for the power cords connecting the projection system. She wanted to plunge the room into darkness. She wanted to pull the physical plug on the truth because she could not stop the words leaving my mouth. Watching my mother crawl on the marble floor to protect my sister felt entirely familiar. Brenda possessed a doctorate in shielding Vanessa from the consequences of her own actions. 4 years ago, my father discovered a severe discrepancy in the accounting ledgers of his logistics company. $5,000 had vanished from a petty cash account over a period of 3 months. He ordered an immediate internal audit. Before the independent auditors could arrive at the office, my mother staged a tearful intervention in our family living room. She claimed an unpaid college intern named Sarah had broken down and confessed to the theft. Brenda convinced my father to fire the young woman without pressing formal charges, framing the dismissal as an act of corporate mercy to save the girl's future. 2 weeks later, I found a stack of designer shopping bags hidden in the back of Vanessa's closet. The bags contained exactly $5,000 worth of luxury shoes and limited edition handbags. When I confronted my mother with the receipts and the matching dates, she slapped me across the face. She told me I was a bitter, jealous sibling trying to ruin my sister's reputation. Sarah the intern lost her job, her professional references, and her dignity, all so Vanessa could wear imported leather without facing a single repercussion. My mother built a monument of lies to keep Vanessa on a pedestal, but she could not blame a college intern today. The evidence was suspended 20 feet in the air and printed on the paper Julian was currently reading. "Mom," I said, my voice cutting through her frantic scratching at the mahogany baseboards, "there are no cords down there. The audio-visual system is hardwired directly into the ceiling grid." Brenda froze. She slowly pushed herself up from the floor, her face flushed a deep, blotchy crimson. Guests in the second row leaned away from her, visibly disturbed by the sight of a wealthy matriarch crawling on her hands and knees to protect a fraud. She pointed a shaking finger at me. "You vindictive, cruel girl," she spat. "You planned this spectacle just to embarrass us. You could have handled this quietly behind closed doors." "I am not humiliating the family, Mom," I replied. The acoustics of the bank carried my words with a chilling, surgical clarity. "I'm just turning on the lights. For 29 years, you allowed her to operate in the dark. You let her steal, lie, and manipulate her way through life while you gladly handed her the matches. You watched her try to burn my wedding to the ground 12 hours ago, and your only concern right now is that other people are watching the smoke. Have you ever had a parent defend a toxic sibling no matter what evidence you provided? Have you ever handed them undeniable proof of a betrayal only to watch them twist reality to make you the villain of the story? Tell me in the comments. Because what my mother did next defied every boundary of rational human behavior. Instead of apologizing, instead of showing an ounce of sorrow for the fact that her eldest daughter was framed for infidelity, Brenda doubled down on the delusion. She hiked up the skirt of her gown and marched right up to the carpeted steps of the altar. She snatched the forensic reports straight out of Julian's hands. She did not even glance at the protocol addresses or the network timestamps. She ripped the thick stack of papers in half. Then she ripped them again, tearing the documents into shreds and letting the pieces flutter to the marble floor like toxic confetti. "This proves nothing," my mother declared, her chest heaving with exertion. "Anyone can print a fake document from a computer. Maya is your best friend. Of course she would forge a report to help you lie. Julian, do not listen to this unhinged nonsense. Luna is just trying to cover up her own guilt by attacking her poor sister." It was a breathtaking display of denial. She was standing beneath a giant canvas showing her youngest daughter paying off a fake lover. Yet she demanded the groom ignore his own eyes and trust her shredded narrative. Julian looked at the torn pieces of paper scattered across the toe of his polished dress shoes. He looked at my mother, whose face was twisted in an ugly snarl of defensive rage. Then he looked at Vanessa, who was still huddled in the front row, sobbing into her hands and playing the eternal victim. Finally, Julian looked at me. The fog of manipulation lifted from his gaze. The crushing weight of what he had almost thrown away hit him with the force of a falling building. The relief that I was innocent crashed headlong into the horrifying reality of what he had done by doubting me in the middle of the night. He watched the shredded paper drift across the altar steps. Each piece represented a fraction of the lie he had swallowed without question. He recognized his own gullibility. The flush of deep, agonizing shame crept up his neck, turning his skin a dark, mottled red. His knees began to buckle under the sudden, immense gravity of his own failure. Julian stared at the shredded fragments of the forensic report scattered across the toes of his polished dress shoes. The irrefutable proof of my innocence lay in jagged pieces on the floor, torn apart by a mother desperate to protect her toxic creation. The reality of what he had done crushed the remaining oxygen from his lungs. His knees buckled. The impact of his body hitting the marble steps of the altar echoed through the silent ballroom. As he collapsed, the pristine white rose boutonniere pinned to his tuxedo lapel snapped off its stem. It tumbled through the air and landed beside the ruined documents. He buried his face in his hands, his broad shoulders shaking with profound, unrestrained grief. He did not care about the 200 guests watching him. He did not care about his pride. He wept with the raw, agonizing realization that he had nearly thrown away his entire future based on a fabricated digital illusion. Luna, oh my God, Luna, I am so sorry. His voice was muffled behind his hands, choked by tears and heavy, ragged breathing. He lowered his arms, looking up at me with red, desperate eyes. She sent the messages from your old phone number, he pleaded, his words tumbling out in a frantic rush to explain the unexplainable. She included timestamps that matched the exact hour you told me you were alone in your suite writing your vows. She referenced private conversations. I panicked. My mind just stopped working. I am so sorry. He reached out, his trembling fingers stretching toward the hem of my ivory silk gown. He sought a physical connection, a silent reassurance that I was still there, that I had not evaporated into the ether of his worst mistake. I took a deliberate step backward. The heavy fabric of my dress swept across the stone floor with a sharp, whispering sound. The physical distance I placed between us spoke louder than any accusation. I watched his outstretched hand fall back to his side, rejected and empty. A sharp, audible intake of breath pierced the quiet of the venue. The sound originated from the second row on the groom's side. Julie Kwando's mother sat rigid in her chair, her hand clamped tightly over her mouth. She was watching her successful, confident son shatter on the floor. She was watching the bride refuse to offer him immediate comfort. The dynamic in the room shifted again, the audience holding its collective breath, waiting to see if the relationship would survive this brutal public autopsy. Sorry is an inadequate word for this scenario, Julian, I said. My voice was gentle, lacking any trace of malice or volume, but it carried the unyielding density of solid iron. I did not yell. Yelling implies a loss of control, and I was the only person in this historic bank who possessed absolute clarity. You promised to be my partner, I continued, looking down at his tear-stained face. You stood in front of our families at the rehearsal dinner and promised to protect the architecture of our life together. But the second my manipulative sister whispered a lie into the dark, you tore our foundation apart with your own hands. You did not ask me for the truth. You did not demand an explanation. You convicted me without a trial, delivered the sentence over the phone, and hung up. I watched him flinch. Every word I spoke landed with precise, calculated accuracy. He knew I was right. This was the defining moment of my existence. I refused to let it pass unexamined. When I was 16 years old, Vanessa planted a stolen exam key in my backpack. She tipped off the school principal to avoid failing her own class. My parents grounded me for a month. They refused to hear my defense, treating my desperate pleas of innocence as further proof of my deceit. They assumed my guilt, because assuming my guilt was the easiest way to maintain their preferred domestic narrative. I learned a bitter lesson during my teenage years. I learned that conditional trust is merely a betrayal waiting for a convenient excuse. I swore a silent oath to myself that I would never share my life, my home, or my heart with someone who looked at me with the same inherent suspicion my parents harbored. Julian carried his own scars. Years before we met, his former fiancé had engaged in a lengthy, humiliating affair with his business partner. Vanessa knew this. My sister weaponized his deepest, unhealed trauma against him. She exploited his lingering fear of abandonment to bypass his logic. I understood the psychological warfare she deployed. I understood why he broke. But understanding a fracture does not magically repair the glass. "I love you," I told him. The words felt incredibly heavy in my chest. That is the only reason I am standing on this altar instead of walking out those double doors. But love cannot survive in a space where faith is optional. Julian closed his eyes, fresh tears tracing clear lines down his face. He nodded slowly, accepting the severity of my boundary. He did not offer another excuse. He absorbed the full weight of his failure. "If we are going to proceed with this wedding," I said, my tone shifting from sorrow to a cold, undeniable command, "you cannot simply apologize to me. You have to look at the people who orchestrated this nightmare. You have to face the individuals who tried to destroy us, and you have to make a choice, right here, right now." I pointed a single finger toward the front row, directing his attention to the true architects of this disaster. Julian opened his eyes. He looked down at the shredded pieces of the forensic report scattered around his knees. He looked up at the towering canvas screens still displaying the frozen black and white image of Vanessa handing a thick envelope of cash to a hired fraud. Then he turned his head and looked directly at my family. The transformation happened in a matter of seconds. The crippling grief that had brought him to his knees evaporated. The profound sadness vanished, burned away by a sudden, blinding realization of what had truly transpired. He was not merely a man who had made a mistake. He was a man who had been targeted, manipulated, and played for a fool by a woman sitting less than 10 feet away. Julian placed his palms flat against the marble steps and pushed himself upright. He stood to his full height, his broad shoulders squaring off. He reached up and wiped the moisture from his face with the back of his hand. His jaw locked into a rigid, unforgiving line. When he looked at Vanessa, his eyes contained no trace of the weeping groom. They were filled with a hardened, unfamiliar rage. It was a cold, terrifying fury. He took a single, deliberate step toward the edge of the altar, his gaze drilling into my sister with such intense hostility that she physically shrank back into her gilded chair. My mother tried to step in front of Vanessa, sensing the dangerous shift in Julian's demeanor. Brenda opened her mouth to launch another volley of defensive lies, preparing to shield her golden child from the wrath of the groom. But I was not finished. Julian's was ready to fight for me, but I needed to execute the final maneuver myself. I had exposed Vanessa's plot against my relationship. Now it was time to expose the secrets she had been hiding from everyone else. I shifted my gaze past my cowering sister and my frantic mother. I looked toward the front row on the groom side of the aisle. I locked eyes with a man wearing a tailored navy suit. His name was Greg. He was a wealthy, mild-mannered investment banker. He was also Vanessa's fiancé, scheduled to marry her in a lavish ceremony 6 months from now. Greg sat rigid in his chair, holding a crystal flute of champagne, looking deeply unsettled by the security footage still projected above our heads. He recognized the deceit, but he did not yet understand his own role in this tragedy. It was time to introduce Greg to the man in the baseball cap. It was time to burn Vanessa's world to the ground, leaving nothing but ash in her wake. The tension in the grand ballroom stretched tight enough to snap. Julian took another heavy step toward the front row. The raw fury radiating from his rigid posture signaled a man pushed past his breaking point. He opened his mouth, drawing a sharp breath to unleash a torrent of justified rage upon the woman who nearly ruined his life. I reached out and placed my hand flat against his chest. The crisp fabric of his tuxedo shirt felt warm beneath my palm. I felt the rapid, booming rhythm of his heartbeat slowing down at my touch. He paused, his dark eyes snapping down to meet mine. I gave him a single, deliberate nod. I appreciated his readiness to defend our relationship, but this battlefield belonged to me. I needed to finish the demolition I started. I turned my attention back to the shivering figure huddled in the front pew. Vanessa was practically hyperventilating. Her chest rose and fell in shallow, erratic bursts. Her perfectly styled hair clung to her damp forehead. She gripped my mother's arm with such intense force that her acrylic nails dug deep into the expensive silk of Brenda's gown. The golden child was suffocating under the weight of her own exposure. She had spent 29 years curating an image of flawless victimhood, and the towering projection screens behind me had incinerated that disguise in a matter of minutes. "By the way, Vanessa," I said. My voice carried a conversational, almost breezy tone that contrasted sharply with the suffocating tension in the room. I reached up and calmly adjusted the edge of my tulle veil. "Did you happen to tell Greg who you hired to play my imaginary lover?" I shifted my gaze away from my sister. I pointed toward the front row on the opposite side of the central aisle. Sitting among Julian's groomsmen and family members was a man named Greg. He was a wealthy, mild-mannered investment banker who specialized in corporate mergers. He wore a tailored navy blue suit and a perfectly knotted silk tie. Greg was Vanessa's fiancé. They were scheduled to host a lavish, high-society wedding in 6 months at a sprawling estate in the Hamptons. Greg represented everything Vanessa desired in life. He offered endless funding, a black card without a spending limit, and entry into the most exclusive social circles on the East Coast. He was her golden ticket, the man she intended to use to fund her lifelong pursuit of unearned luxury. Throughout the entire digital presentation, Greg had remained silent. He sat rigid in his mahogany chair, gripping a crystal flute of champagne. He looked deeply unsettled by the security footage still projected above our heads. He recognized the deceit unfolding before his eyes, but he did not yet understand his own role in this tragedy. He thought he was merely a spectator, watching his future sister-in-law defend her honor. He was about to learn he was the star of a parallel betrayal. "Greg," I said, projecting my voice so it reached his section of the audience clearly, "do you recognize the man in the video?" Greg blinked. He sat forward, leaning his elbows on his knees. He squinted at the towering canvas screens. The high-definition black-and-white image remained paused on the exact frame where the tall man in the baseball cap accepted the thick envelope of cash from Vanessa. The angle of the camera captured the sharp profile of his jawline and the distinct slope of his nose. Greg tilted his head, his brow furrowing in deep concentration. The polite confusion on his face slowly contorted into a portrait of creeping horror. The blood drained from his cheeks, leaving his skin the color of old parchment. His lips parted. "Is that Derek?" he whispered. His voice was barely audible, but the impeccable acoustics of the historic bank carried the name across the silent rows of guests. I offered a slow, definitive nod. Yes. The ex-boyfriend Vanessa supposedly blocked 2 years ago. Derek was a name that carried heavy, toxic baggage in our family. 2 years prior, he caused a spectacular scene at a Thanksgiving dinner, arriving heavily intoxicated and demanding Vanessa pay off a gambling debt he incurred in her name. Following that disaster, Vanessa swore to Greg, my parents, and anyone who would listen that she had severed all ties with the degenerate gambler. She claimed she filed a restraining order. She used the traumatic breakup to extract a lavish European vacation from Greg, citing her need to heal from the emotional abuse. She lied about the healing, just as she lied about the blocking. He's the same man she's been secretly meeting at the Marriott downtown every Tuesday For the past 6 months, I continued. The words fell like heavy stones into the quiet venue. Maya pulled those security feeds too, if you would like to review them. They are quite extensive. They cover the lobby, the elevator banks, and the fourth-floor executive suites. The silence in the grand ballroom stretched to a breaking point. The 200 guests absorbed this secondary shockwave. The bride was not the cheater. The righteous weeping bridesmaid in the front row, the one who tried to destroy a marriage out of pure spite, was harboring an illicit double life. Vanessa had projected her own infidelity onto me to ruin my day. A sharp, distinct sound shattered the suffocating quiet. Crash! Greg dropped his champagne flute. The delicate crystal hit the polished marble floor and exploded. Sparkling glass shards flew outward, scattering across the toes of his expensive leather shoes. The pale golden liquid pooled on the pristine white stone, reflecting the harsh light of the projectors. The sound of the breaking glass acted like a starter pistol. Vanessa shrieked. It was a guttural, panicked noise that sounded more animal than human. She shoved my mother aside and lunged across the center aisle toward her fiancé. Her blush gown tangled around her knees as she scrambled over the scattered crystal shards. "Greg, no!" she wailed, reaching out with both hands to grab the lapels of his navy suit. "She is lying. She is a jealous psycho. She fabricated all of this to ruin our relationship." Her defense mechanism was predictable. Whenever cornered by facts, Vanessa relied on volume and character assassination. She expected Greg to default to his usual pattern of pacifying her hysteria. She expected him to pat her hand, ignore the glaring inconsistencies, and whisk her away from the confrontation. But the dynamic had fundamentally shifted. Greg was a man of numbers, data, and risk assessment. He was currently staring at literal, high-definition video evidence suspended 20 feet in the air, while the woman screaming in his face offered nothing but hollow, recycled denials. The timeline clicked into place inside his mind. The Tuesday afternoon meetings she claimed were dedicated to wedding planning and floral consultations. The mysterious cash withdrawals she dismissed as bridal boutique deposits. The puzzle pieces locked together, forming a devastating picture of prolonged, calculated betrayal. Throwing stones in a glass house is a dangerous game. My sister spent her entire morning hurling boulders at my relationship, entirely unaware that her own structural foundation was built on fragile, transparent lies. She wanted to watch my life implode. She never anticipated I would hand the detonator to her future husband. Greg did not reach out to catch her. He did not offer a comforting embrace. As Vanessa's hands clawed at his tailored jacket, his expression hardened into a mask of pure, unadulterated disgust. He looked down at the woman he intended to marry, and he saw a stranger. He saw a predator caught in her own trap. The audience watched in captive horror. The wedding ceremony had transformed into a public execution of a fraudulent life. The guests, who had whispered pitying remarks about my solo walk down the aisle, were now staring at Vanessa with open, unabashed revulsion. My colleagues from the public relations agency exchanged knowing glances. They recognized a crisis that no amount of spin could ever mitigate. I stood at the altar, my spine perfectly straight, the vintage diamond drop earrings cold against my skin. I felt the steady, grounding presence of Julian standing right beside me. He did not pull away this time. He stepped closer, his shoulder brushing against mine, presenting a united, impenetrable front. Vanessa continued to weep, her tears ruining her expensive makeup, leaving dark, jagged streaks of mascara running down her flushed cheeks. She begged Greg to look at her, to listen to her fabricated excuses, but her words held no power here. The truth was loud, undeniable, and currently printed on the faces of every single person in the room. The golden child was falling, and there was no mother on earth who could catch her. I took a deep breath, inhaling the scent of eucalyptus and white roses. The heavy, suffocating weight I had carried for 29 years lifted from my shoulders. The era of my silence was officially over. The era of my sister's reign of terror had reached its spectacular conclusion. But a trapped animal is the most dangerous kind. My father, Richard, who had spent the entire ordeal hiding in the shadows of my mother's panic, finally decided to insert himself into the wreckage. He was about to make the worst miscalculation of his life. "Do not touch me," Greg commanded. His voice did not echo through the vaulted ceilings of the historic bank. It possessed a low, glacial frequency that froze my sister in her tracks. He did not yell. He did not wave his arms or put on a theatrical display of heartbreak. The quiet, unyielding disgust in his tone proved far more devastating than any shouted accusation. He looked at the frantic woman clawing at his tailored navy suit, and his expression morphed into the clinical detachment of a man evaluating a worthless asset. Vanessa froze, her manicured hands hovering inches from his lapels. Her chest heaved. The shards of the shattered crystal champagne flute crunched beneath the hem of her blush silk gown. She opened her mouth to launch another volley of fabricated excuses, ready to spin a new web of deceit regarding the security footage still projected high above the altar. Greg cut her off before she could form a single syllable. "We are done, Vanessa," he said. The finality in his words hung heavy in the chilled air. "Do not call me, do not text me, and do not go back to my house. I will have my assistant pack your belongings and send them to your parents by the end of the week." Greg reached out and grabbed her left wrist. His grip was firm and deliberate. Vanessa gasped, her eyes widening in renewed terror as she realized his intention. She tried to pull her hand away, curling her fingers inward to protect the symbol of her unearned status. Greg did not let go. He clamped his other hand over her knuckles and pulled. He slid the 3-carat emerald-cut diamond engagement ring off her finger. The friction of the heavy platinum band scraping over her knuckle left a stark, angry red mark circling her pale skin. It was a physical brand of her revoked privilege. Greg did not throw the ring at her. He did not toss it onto the marble floor. He placed the multi-$1,000 piece of jewelry onto the seat of the mahogany chair beside him, treating it with the casual indifference of discarding a used napkin. He turned his back on the weeping bridesmaid. He adjusted his silk tie, smoothed the front of his jacket, and walked straight down the center aisle. The 200 guests seated in the pews parted their knees to give him a wide berth. Nobody spoke. The only sound in the grand ballroom was the steady, rhythmic click of Greg's leather shoes striking the pristine white carpet. He reached the back of the venue, pushed through the heavy oak double doors, and walked out into the Chicago afternoon. He left without a backward glance. The heavy doors swung shut with a definitive thud. The sound severed Vanessa's final tether to her gilded future. She stared at the empty mahogany chair, her gaze locked on the glittering diamond ring sitting abandoned on the velvet cushion. The reality of her sudden, catastrophic downfall crashed into her. She had spent 6 months jeopardizing a millionaire fiancé to sneak into cheap hotel rooms with an unemployed gambler, assuming she was smart enough to juggle both lives indefinitely. Now, she possessed neither. Vanessa let out a wail so loud and raw, it sounded inhuman. Her knees buckled. She collapsed sideways, her body folding into my mother. Brenda caught her golden child, wrapping her arms around Vanessa's shaking shoulders. My mother glared at me from the front row, her eyes burning with a toxic, irrational hatred. In her distorted reality, Vanessa was not facing the consequences of her own infidelity. Vanessa was the victim of a cruel, calculated ambush orchestrated by a jealous older sister. Brenda stroked Vanessa's ruined hair, whispering frantic, soothing reassurances that everything would be fixed. But Brenda lacked the tools to fix a high-definition security feed. That is when my father decided to intervene. Richard had spent the entire ordeal sitting in the front row, staring blankly at the toes of his polished dress shoes. He was a man who built his entire existence on the avoidance of conflict. Throughout my childhood, whenever Vanessa threw a tantrum or my mother launched an unfair tirade against me, Richard would retreat behind a newspaper, or suddenly discover urgent yard work requiring his immediate attention. He preferred a comfortable delusion over an uncomfortable truth. He was entirely useless in moments of moral crisis. But watching Greg walk out the door triggered a different kind of panic in my father. Greg represented a prestigious social alliance and a very lucrative future son-in-law. Richard had bragged about the upcoming Hamptons wedding to his business partners for months. Now, that social currency lay shattered on the floor alongside the crystal flute. Richard pushed himself up from his chair. His face, usually a pale, passive mask, had flooded with a deep, mottled purple hue. The veins in his neck bulged against the stiff collar of his tuxedo shirt. He did not turn his anger toward the daughter who had cheated. He did not scream at the daughter who had hired an actor to frame an innocent woman. He marched directly toward the altar, his heavy footsteps echoing across the marble, aiming his entire arsenal of misplaced rage at me. "Luna, that is enough," my father boomed. His voice rattled the floral arrangements lining the steps. He stopped at the base of the altar, pointing a thick, accusatory finger at my face. He looked like a cornered tyrant, realizing his empire was built on sand. "You have ruined your sister's life," he shouted, his chest heaving with exertion. "Have you no shame? To do this today, in front of all these people? You are a disgrace to this family." I stood my ground. The vintage diamond drop earrings brushed against my neck as I tilted my chin downward, studying the purple-faced man shouting at me. Beside me, Julian tensed, stepping forward to shield me from the verbal assault, but I placed a steady hand on his arm, holding him back. I did not require a human shield. I required my father to finish digging his own grave. "This is not a courtroom, Luna," Richard continued, his volume escalating as he tried to regain control of a room that had slipped far beyond his grasp. He spun around, facing the 200 guests who were watching the matriarch and patriarch of the family implode. He waved his arms in broad, sweeping motions, acting like a frantic traffic cop trying to clear a multi-car pileup. "The wedding is over," my father declared to the audience. He raised his chin, adopting a posture of supreme, unearned authority. "We are paying for this event, and I am shutting it down right now. There is nothing left to celebrate here. Everyone, go home." He expected the guests to obey. He expected the string quartet to pack up their instruments, the catering staff to clear the tables, and the audience to shuffle quietly out the double doors, honoring his financial command. In his mind, the person who signed the checks owned the reality. He believed his money granted him the power to cancel the truth. Down in the front row, my mother seized upon this tactic. Brenda gently pushed the weeping Vanessa back into her chair and stood up to join her husband at the battle line. She marched to the base of the altar, standing shoulder to shoulder with Richard. "You always were a bitter, vindictive girl," my mother spat. Her voice dripped with an acidic resentment she had harbored since the day I realized I did not need her approval to survive. "You planned this spectacle just to hurt us. You could not stand the thought of Vanessa finding happiness with Greg, so you orchestrated this entire nightmare." I looked at her, marveling at the sheer, breathtaking elasticity of her delusion. She was standing beneath a frozen image of her youngest daughter paying a bribe. Yet she continued to rewrite the narrative in real time. "We are pulling the funding for this venue immediately," Brenda threatened, pointing a manicured finger at my face. "Do you hear me, Luna? Every single dime. We will cancel the catering contract. We will cancel the floral arrangements. You are going to be sued for this stunt. We will bankrupt you for the damage you have done to your sister today." The threats hung in the chilled air of the grand ballroom. The guests sat in stunned silence, watching my parents attempt to crush my spirit with financial ruin. They waited for my reaction. They waited for the bride to crumble under the combined weight of parental rejection and impending debt. I looked at my red-faced father, waving his arms. I looked at my mother spitting venom and promising lawsuits. I looked at the 3-carat diamond ring sitting abandoned on the mahogany chair. I did not cry. I did not scream. I did not beg them to reconsider. I just smiled. It was not a smirk. It was a real, genuine smile. A slow warmth spread through my chest, chasing away the final lingering shadows of the frightened, compliant daughter I used to be. For 29 years, my parents controlled my environment by leveraging their wealth. They used money to shield Vanessa, and they used money to punish me. They thought they possessed the ultimate trump card. They thought they held the power to turn off the lights and send everyone home. They had no idea they were standing in a building they did not own, threatening to cancel a contract they did not sign, using money they no longer possessed. My parents had just walked right into my final trap, and I was about to drop the steel cage directly on their heads. "Pull the funding," I repeated. I let the question float above the mahogany pews, allowing the sheer absurdity of the threat to settle over the audience. My parents stood at the base of the altar, their chests puffed out, radiating the hollow confidence of people who believed their bank accounts granted them immunity from consequence. Throughout my childhood, financial leverage served as their primary parenting tool. If I argued against curfews, they threatened my college tuition. If Vanessa demanded a designer handbag, they purchased it to maintain domestic tranquility. Money was the only currency they understood. They thought they were holding a winning hand. They assumed I was a desperate bride, relying on their charity to fund the most important day of my life. I raised my right hand into the cool, floral-scented air. I pressed my thumb and middle finger together. I snapped my fingers. The sharp, crisp sound cracked like a whip across the silent ballroom. From the deep shadows near the catering entrance, a figure stepped forward. It was Marcus. He wore a tailored charcoal suit and a sleek silver tie. He carried a leather-bound clipboard tucked neatly under his left arm. Marcus possessed the calm, unflappable demeanor of a man who managed high-stakes corporate events for a living. He walked down the side aisle with purposeful, measured steps, ignoring the bewildered stares of my extended family. He stopped right beside the floral archway, standing at attention just a few feet away from my red-faced father. "Dad, Mom," I said, keeping my tone perfectly level, "you did not pay for this wedding." Richard scoffed. The sound was a harsh, ugly bark of derision. He crossed his arms over his chest, his face turning an even deeper shade of mottled purple. "What kind of delusional game are you playing, Luna? We wrote a check for $80,000 to the Waverly Event Group last month. I handed the envelope to your sister myself. She deposited it directly into the vendor holding account to cover the catering, the string quartet, and this opulent venue. Do not stand there and lie to my face in front of our friends." I looked down at the man who had abandoned me at the threshold of the aisle. I felt no anger toward his ignorance. I only felt a clinical, detached pity. "Yes, you did write that check," I replied. My voice dropped to a low, lethal timbre that demanded total silence from the room. "You wrote an $80,000 check to an entity called Waverly Event Group. But you never verified the business license. You simply trusted Vanessa because she offered to alleviate your stress by handling the tedious vendor payments. She played the role of the helpful, supportive sibling perfectly." I gestured toward Marcus. He opened his leather clipboard, revealing a stack of banking statements and routing documents. "Waverly Event Group is not an event planning agency, Dad," I explained. "It is a shell corporation, a limited liability company registered in the state of Delaware exactly 6 weeks ago. The sole managing member listed on the incorporation documents is Vanessa." My father froze. His arms slowly dropped to his sides. The smug, authoritative posture drained from his body, replaced by a sudden, chilling paralysis. Beside him, my mother stopped breathing. Her hands hovered in midair, her mind struggling to process the impossible mathematics of my statement. Down in the front row, the weeping bridesmaid suddenly went completely still. Vanessa stopped crying. The theatrical sobs evaporated. She sat frozen in her blush silk gown, staring at the floor, trapped in a nightmare she could not manipulate her way out of. "She kept the money, Dad," I said, delivering the fatal blow with surgical precision. She intercepted your check. She funneled the funds through that shell company and transferred every single dime into a private offshore account. Maya tracked those routing numbers yesterday afternoon. Your $80,000 did not purchase the white roses or the champagne. Your money funded her secret life with Derek. It paid for the downtown hotel suites. It covered his lingering gambling debts. It financed the extravagant betrayal she orchestrated against her own fiancé. The collective shock in the room became a physical weight. Greg, sitting in the front row, let out a hollow, bitter laugh, finally understanding the scope of the financial parasitism he had narrowly escaped. Julian stood beside me, shaking his head in quiet disbelief at the sheer magnitude of the theft. For 29 years, my parents funneled their resources toward Vanessa. They paid her credit card bills. They financed her luxury vacations. They bailed her out of every minor inconvenience. They believed they were investing in their golden child. Instead, they had bankrolled a fraud who stole their money to conduct an illicit affair with a degenerate gambler. Richard opened his mouth, but no sound emerged. His vocal cords failed him. The patriarch who had just threatened to ruin my life with a lawsuit could not comprehend that he was the actual victim of grand larceny. Brenda turned her head slowly, looking back at her youngest daughter. For the first time in her life, my mother did not see a fragile girl requiring protection. She saw a thief. But the $80,000 theft was merely the prologue GK revelation. If Vanessa stole the vendor funds, my mother whispered, her voice trembling with a fragile, hollow panic, then who paid for today? Who GK for the flowers and the food? I paid for this entire wedding myself, I answered. I let the statement echo through the historic bank. I watched the faces of my aunts and uncles, the people who had spent decades offering me condescending pity because they assumed I was struggling to match my sister's fabricated success. I built my public relations agency from the ground up in complete silence. I worked 80-hour weeks. I secured high-level corporate clients. I navigated international crisis management campaigns while my family gossiped about my modest apartment and my lack of designer clothing. I never asked them for a loan. I never requested a handout. I chose to build an empire in the shadows, waiting for the day I could step into the light on my own terms. But I did not just write a check to the caterer, Mom, I continued. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, the heavy silk of my gown rustling against the stone. I turned my gaze upward, sweeping my arm to encompass the soaring arched ceilings, the towering stained glass windows, and the intricate gold leaf molding of the grand ballroom. In fact, my holding company acquired this historic property 6 months ago, I announced. The words rang out with undeniable authority. We purchased the building, renovated the grand ballroom, and rebranded the event space. You cannot pull the funding for this venue, Dad. You cannot cancel the contract, because I literally own the roof over your heads. The silence that followed this declaration was profound. It was the sound of a generational power dynamic shifting on its axis. My parents thought I was the insignificant, struggling older sister. They assumed I relied on their benevolence to orchestrate my wedding day. They treated me like a charity case they could control and discard at their whim. They possessed zero knowledge of my financial reality. They had no idea they were standing in a room owned by a millionaire. Marcus stepped forward, handing a single sheet of paper to my father. It was a copy of the property deed. Richard stared at the legal document, his eyes tracking over my name printed clearly on the ownership line. The ink was black, bold, and irrefutable. The illusion of his supreme authority shattered into a million irreparable pieces. He was not the benefactor of this event. He was merely a guest, and his invitation was about to expire. Did you see that twist coming? Drop a yes or a no in the comments below. If you are loving this karma as much as I am, hit that like button right now. Let me know you are still with me. The transformation in my parents' was a masterclass in defeat. The arrogant, flushed anger drained away, leaving them looking small, aged, and profoundly lost. They had spent decades building a hierarchy based on financial superiority and favoritism. Now, the daughter they idolized was exposed as a common thief, and the daughter they neglected was revealed as the owner of the very ground beneath their feet. They had nothing left to threaten me with. They possessed no leverage. The strings they used to manipulate our family dynamic had been cut, leaving them stranded on a stage they no longer controlled. I turned my attention back to the security detail waiting by the heavy oak doors. It was time to clean house. It was time to remove the poison from my life permanently. The reckoning was complete, but the physical expulsion was just beginning. I turned my gaze from the legal document resting in my father's shaking hand back to the main aisle. I lifted my chin and met the eyes of the venue manager. Marcus offered a curt nod. He raised 2 fingers, signaling the security personnel stationed near the foyer. 3 broad-shouldered men dressed in tailored black suits detached themselves from the shadows. They began a slow, deliberate march toward the altar, their leather shoes striking the pristine white carpet with a synchronized, rhythmic precision. "So," I said, keeping my voice remarkably calm and level, "you cannot shut this wedding down, Dad. You lack the authority, the funds, and the ownership required to dismiss my guests, but I can definitely kick you out." I looked at the 3 of them standing there. This trio formed the nucleus of my lifelong isolation. They were the architects of every self-doubt I ever harbored. When I was 16 years old, I purchased a cheap brass padlock from a hardware store and installed it on my bedroom door. I merely wanted to prevent Vanessa from entering my space and ruining my belongings whenever she felt spiteful. The very next afternoon, my father removed my entire door from its hinges with a power drill. He claimed our family did not tolerate secrets. He prioritized her unfettered access over my fundamental right to privacy. He left my room exposed to the hallway for an entire year to teach me a lesson about boundaries. Today, the scales were finally balanced. I possessed the ultimate G-gay lock. "Vanessa, you are a toxic, jealous fraud," I stated, aiming the words directly at the shivering bridesmaid in the front row. Her face was a tragic, ruined canvas. The expensive waterproof mascara she applied that morning had surrendered under the sheer volume of her terror. Thick, dark streaks ran down her chin, dripping onto the delicate lace collar of her blush silk gown. Her pristine blowout hung in limp, sweat-dampened strands around her flushed cheeks. Stripped of her unearned confidence and her wealthy fiancé, she looked exactly like the hollow, miserable predator she always was. I shifted my focus to the people who raised us. "Mom, Dad, you enabled her abuse my entire life. You funded her cruelty. You turned a blind eye to every theft, every lie, and every manipulation, because holding her accountable required a spine neither of you possessed. You sacrificed my well-being on the altar of her fragile ego for nearly 3 decades. I paused, letting the heavy truth settle over their slumped shoulders. "I am no longer your scapegoat," I declared. "I refuse to carry the weight of your parental failures for another second." I raised my arm and pointed straight down the long white carpet toward the back of the grand ballroom. The gesture was sharp, definitive, and final. Get out of my building, get out of my wedding, and get out of my life. Vanessa tried to scream at me. She opened her mouth, baring her teeth like a cornered animal, preparing to unleash a torrent of vicious insults. But the sound caught in her throat. 2 of the security guards stepped smoothly to her sides. They did not touch her, but their imposing physical presence formed an impenetrable wall, effectively ending her reign of verbal terror. She shrank back into her own shoulders, clutching her ruined designer dress, her bravado evaporating into the chilled air. My father looked profoundly broken. The patriarchal authority he wore like a protective shield had dissolved. The undeniable truth emasculated him in front of 200 peers. He realized his legacy consisted of an eldest daughter who despised him and a youngest daughter who stole his retirement funds to finance a cheap hotel affair. His shoulders rounded inward. He dropped his gaze to the marble floor, entirely unable to meet the eyes of his business partners sitting in the middle rows. He looked like an old, defeated man. My mother simply wept. These were not her usual theatrical, manipulative tears designed to garner sympathy. They were the silent, heavy tears of a catastrophic realization. She looked at me, taking in the vintage diamond drop earrings, the custom ivory gown, and the unwavering strength radiating from my posture. She realized she bet her entire identity on the wrong child. The daughter she discarded owned the castle, and the daughter she worshipped was a common thief. "Time to go, folks," Marcus said quietly, stepping in behind my father. The security guards corralled the three of them, guiding them away from the altar and pointing them toward the exit. The walk of shame commenced. 200 people watched them go. The silence in the room was absolute. It was a pin-drop quiet, the kind of stillness that only exists in the immediate aftermath of a devastating storm. The guests did not whisper. They did not shift in their seats. They did not pull out their phones to record the spectacle. They simply bore witness to the ultimate eviction. The only sound in the historic bank was the slow, shuffling footsteps of my family retreating down the aisle. As they passed the front row, I heard the rhythmic crunch of broken crystal beneath my father's shoes as he stepped over the ruined remnants of Greg's champagne flute. It was a fitting soundtrack to their departure. They were walking over the shattered pieces of the wealthy future they had tried so desperately to secure. Greg did not look at Vanessa as she passed his empty chair. Julian's parents stared straight ahead, their expressions etched with a stern, unforgiving judgment. My colleagues from the public relations agency watched with clinical fascination, observing the real-time destruction of a toxic brand. My parents and my sister reached the back of the venue. The guards reached out and pushed the heavy brass handles. The towering oak doors swung outward, spilling a harsh rectangle of bright Chicago daylight into the dim, romantic glow of the ballroom foyer. My family stepped over the threshold, disappearing into the glare of the afternoon sun. They did not look back. They possessed nothing left to say. The security guards stepped back inside the venue. They grabbed the brass handles and pulled. The heavy oak doors swung shut. The impact echoed through the vaulted ceilings with a definitive, resonant thud. It sounded exactly like a bank vault locking into place, sealing away a hazardous material forever. The toxic chapter of my life was officially over. A profound, weightless relief washed through my veins, starting at the base of my skull and traveling all the way down to my fingertips. The air in the ballroom suddenly felt cleaner, purged of the suffocating judgment I had breathed since childhood. I did not feel a single shred of guilt. I felt emancipated. The invisible chains of familial obligation lay severed on the floor, cut by the sharp edge of the undeniable truth. I took a deep, cleansing breath, allowing the scent of eucalyptus and white roses to fill my lungs. The battle against my bloodline was won. I possessed the high ground, the financial independence, and the moral victory. But the war was only half over. The villains were banished from the theater, but the collateral damage remained, standing right beside me on the stage. I had dismantled the lie, but I still needed to address the man who almost believed it. I turned slowly back around to face the altar. Julian was still standing there. He had not moved a single muscle during the entire expulsion. He looked shell-shocked, his tuxedo slightly rumpled, his handsome face stained with the residue of his earlier breakdown. He stared at me with an expression of profound awe, terrified reverence, and lingering agony. He watched me execute a flawless, tactical defense of my honor, and he knew he had failed to assist me when it mattered most. The room collectively held its breath once more. The audience shifted their attention from the closed oak doors back to the bride and the groom. They watched two people standing in the wreckage of a shattered morning. The undeniable truth was out in the open, but the damage to his trust was a gaping, bleeding wound. The liars were gone, but could we actually rebuild the faith required to speak our vows? What happens now? The echo of the heavy oak doors faded into the vaulted ceiling. The historic bank fell into a deep, expectant hush. The toxic elements of my life were banished to the Chicago streets, yet the hardest battle remained waiting for me on the altar. I turned my body away from the entrance. I faced the man I intended to marry. Julian stood exactly where I had left him. The righteous fury that had hardened his features during his confrontation with my sister had vanished. The anger drained from his face, leaving behind a portrait of profound awe and deep, unvarnished remorse. He looked at me as if he were seeing me for the very first time. He witnessed me dismantle a generational curse without raising my voice. He watched me reclaim my kingdom. Now, he stood in the wreckage of his own doubt, waiting for his judgment. I stepped closer to him. The distance between us closed, but the emotional chasm required a bridge built of raw honesty. The small microphone clipped to the lapel of the silver-haired officiant picked up the faint rustle of my ivory silk gown. "Julian," I said softly. My voice carried a slight tremor. It was the first time I allowed my vulnerability to surface since the midnight phone call. "You did not trust me when it mattered most," I told him. I held his dark eyes, refusing to let him look away or hide behind his shame. "You promised to be my partner, but the moment an illusion of betrayal appeared on your screen, you discarded my character. I need to know why." I demanded an explanation in front of 200 guests. I did not ask for privacy. Secrets and closed doors were the currency my parents used to hide their dysfunction. I wanted my marriage to begin in the harsh, unforgiving light of day. If we were going to survive this, the truth had to be spoken aloud. Julian did not flinch. He did not shy away from the spotlight. Right there, beneath the towering projection screens that had just broadcast my innocence, he bared his soul. "Because I have always been terrified that I was not enough for you, Luna," he confessed. His voice broke on my name, but he pushed forward. He spoke with an agonizing clarity that resonated through the venue's speakers. Julian was a senior corporate architect. He designed skyscrapers intended to withstand hurricanes and earthquakes. He understood structural integrity. But his own internal foundation was flawed. Years before we met, his former fiancé engaged in a prolonged affair with his closest friend. That betrayal left a hidden fault line in his confidence. "You are so strong," he continued, his gaze locked on mine. "You are so fiercely independent. I watched you build your entire public relations agency from nothing. I watched you navigate a family that offered you zero support. You wear your resilience like armor. You never ask for help. You never show weakness." He took a shaky breath, his chest rising and falling. "When that text message arrived last night, my deepest insecurities won the battle," Julian admitted. "I saw a fabricated scenario where you realized you did not need me. I saw my worst nightmare projected onto a glowing screen. I did not think like a rational partner. I reacted like a wounded man terrified of being left behind. I was weak. I let a digital ghost exploit the cracks in my own confidence." Tears pooled in his eyes, but he did not wipe them away. He let the audience witness his contrition. "I am so sorry I failed you," he whispered. "And I will spend the rest of my life making sure I am never weak when it comes to defending you again." It was raw. It was real. He did not offer a polished fairy tale excuse. He did not try to justify his actions by blaming the sophisticated nature of Vanessa's spoofing software. He owned his failure. He laid his flawed human heart on the marble steps and asked me to accept it. For my entire life, I dealt with a mother and a father who refused to admit fault. They deflected blame. They rewrote history to preserve their own egos. Julian doing the exact opposite, humbling himself before our entire community, provided the ultimate contrast. It healed the fracture his doubt had created. A subtle shift in the atmosphere rippled through the grand ballroom. The stifling tension broke. A quiet wave of empathy washed over the seated guests. Julian's mother, sitting in the second row, wiped her eyes with a tissue. Greg, the man who had just discarded his own fraudulent fiancé, offered Julian a slow, respectful nod from across the aisle. Maya sensed the heavy energy required a release valve. My maid of honor possessed an impeccable instinct for timing. She stepped up to the center of the altar, her floral bouquet discarded on a nearby chair. In her hands, she held 2 small crystal shot glasses. The glasses were filled to the brim with amber liquid. It was a high-end aged tequila we had reserved for the reception toast. Maya held the glasses out to us. She offered a rare, genuine smile. Julian reached out first. His hands were shaking so noticeably that the amber liquid sloshed against the crystal rim. He took the glass, wrapping his trembling fingers around the heavy base. I took the second glass, my own hand steady, mirroring his movement. To burning down the past, Maya declared loudly, ensuring her voice carried past the front pews. Julian looked at me. He raised his crystal glass into the air, offering a salute to the woman who had fought a war to stand beside him. To building a future built on total truth, he added. We brought the glasses to our lips. We took the shots in unison. The tequila burned a warm, grounding path down my throat. The liquid fire chased away the lingering chill of the morning. It felt like a baptism. We were leaving the pristine, naive expectations of a perfect wedding behind. We were stepping into a gritty, tested reality. I handed my empty glass back to Maya. I turned to face the silver-haired officiant. He was staring at us with wide eyes, still holding his leather-bound book in a white-knuckled grip. Okay, I told him. You can continue. The officiant cleared his throat, his posture straightening. He flipped to the correct page, his voice ringing out with a renewed, joyful vigor. The string quartet, taking their cue from the altar, softly resumed playing a hopeful, soaring melody. We spoke our vows. The words possessed a gravity they lacked 12 hours ago. When Julian promised to honor and protect me, his voice rang with the fierce determination of a man granted a miraculous second chance. When I promised to cherish him, I meant every syllable. He slid the gold band onto my finger. I placed his ring on his hand. The officiant pronounced us husband and wife. When Julian kissed me, the grand ballroom erupted. The applause was not polite or obligatory. It was a roaring, thunderous ovation from 200 people who had just watched us walk through fire and emerge victorious. We turned to face our guests. We walked back down the white carpet together. The heavy oak doors at the end of the aisle were thrown open by the security team, revealing the bright, sunlit foyer waiting to host our reception. The nightmare was over. The celebration could finally begin. But as we crossed the threshold into the reception hall, leaving the ceremony space behind, Maya caught up to us. She leaned close to my ear, her celebratory smile not quite reaching her eyes. She held her cell phone tightly in her hand. "Luna," Maya whispered, her tone dropping into a serious clinical register. "Your sister did not go home. She just logged on to social media." The physical confrontation was finished, but the digital war was just beginning. The ceremony reached its poignant conclusion. Julie and I crossed the stone threshold, leaving the hushed sanctuary of the arched ballroom behind us. Maya walked closely at my side. She leaned inward, her voice dropping into a serious clinical register, to deliver her warning about my sister logging onto social media. I raised my hand and gently covered the glowing screen of her cellular device. I requested 1 single hour of peace. I needed 60 minutes to exist merely as a triumphant bride before I returned to the trenches to command a digital war. Maya offered a brief, understanding nod. She slid the phone into her silk pocket, allowing the crisis to simmer on a back burner. The heavy oak doors leading GK Reception Hall swung open. GK Quartet was replaced by a premier disc jockey who immediately dropped a heavy, pulsating bass line into the cavernous space. The upbeat rhythm vibrated through the polished hardwood floorboards. 200 guests flooded the transformed room, their previous shock and lingering tension dissolving into a fierce, jubilant energy. The polite, restrained applause customary of a traditional wedding morphed into a raucous, roaring ovation. They cheered for a couple who had walked through an emotional inferno and emerged intact. I stood at the edge of the dance floor and surveyed the room. The absence of my biological relatives felt like shedding a physical burden I had carried for nearly 3 decades. During the early planning phases, my mother demanded final approval over the event aesthetics. She insisted my taste lacked the required sophistication for a high society gathering. She wanted towering, ostentatious lilies that would obscure the sightlines and dominate the tables. I quietly vetoed her choices, selecting low, elegant clusters of white ranunculus and seeded eucalyptus instead. Without her hovering near the catering stations to critique the linens, the room felt vibrant and authentic. Without my sister demanding the photographer capture her optimal angles, the camera lenses focused entirely on genuine, candid joy. The air itself felt lighter, purged of their toxic, suffocating expectations. Julian guided me toward our sweetheart table, but his parents intercepted our path. His mother, Diane, enveloped me in a fierce, uncompromising embrace. She did not offer polite, hollow platitudes about the unfortunate scene at the altar. She held me tight, her actions communicating a profound, maternal protective instinct. Julian grew up in a household where loyalty was paramount and deceit was fundamentally intolerable. His father, William Reed, managed a highly successful commercial real estate firm downtown. William was a stoic, practical man who rarely displayed overt emotion in public settings. He stepped forward, bypassed the standard formal handshake, and wrapped his arms around my shoulders. He leaned close to my ear, his expression serious and unyielding. "You are a force of nature, kid," William whispered, his voice rough with unshed emotion. "We are incredibly lucky to have you in our ranks." The phrasing struck a chord deep within my chest. Ranks, a unified front. For the first time in my 29 years, I stood among people who viewed my resilience as an asset rather than a threat. They did not ask me to shrink to accommodate their fragile egos. They celebrated my fire. They recognized the tactical precision it took to dismantle a predator, and they respected the boundary I drew to protect their son. The catering staff circled the room bearing silver trays of seared scallops and premium champagne. The suffocating dread that had choked the ceremony evaporated, replaced by bright, uninhibited laughter. Colleagues from my agency raised their glasses, toasting my flawless execution of a live crisis management scenario. Julian finally relaxed, the haunting, bruised shadows leaving his dark eyes. He discarded his tuxedo jacket, loosened his silver tie, and spun me around the dance floor. We existed in a vibrant bubble of pure, unadulterated triumph. The trauma of the morning felt distant, locked safely away behind the heavy brass handles of the venue doors. But peace is a fragile, temporary construct when dealing with a cornered narcissist. My requested hour of tranquility expired exactly on schedule. As the disc jockey transitioned the music to a slower, rhythmic tempo, Maya materialized at the edge of the dance floor. She did not smile. She held her smartphone tight against her chest, her posture rigid and alert. She caught my eye and offered a subtle, urgent nod toward the secluded corridor leading to the bridal staging suites. I squeezed Julian's hand, signaling a brief departure. I navigated through the crowd of swaying guests, the heavy silk train of my gown gliding smoothly behind me. I met Maya in the quiet hallway, away from the pulsating music and the clinking glassware. The ambient noise faded into a dull, thumping bass line. Maya handed me her device without a word. The screen displayed a popular social media application. Vanessa had initiated a live video broadcast 15 minutes ago. She was sitting in the passenger seat of an unfamiliar vehicle, likely a ride-share service, having been promptly evicted from the hotel block by my security team. I tapped the screen to unmute the audio. My sister stared into the front-facing camera, executing her signature, practiced performance. Her face was a portrait of manufactured devastation. She had purposefully smeared her remaining eyeliner to enhance the visual impact of her suffering. Fat, dramatic tears streamed down her flushed cheeks, landing on the crumpled lace collar of her blush bridesmaid dress. "Luna hacked my accounts," Vanessa sobbed, her voice trembling with calculated vulnerability. "She hired a digital editor to create deepfake videos of me. She projected them at her own wedding just to humiliate me in front of my fiancé. She has always been jealous of my relationship with Greg. She bullied our parents into leaving the venue. I am stranded in downtown Chicago, and my own sister destroyed my life because she cannot handle sharing the spotlight." I glanced at the viewer metrics located in the corner of the screen. The broadcast had already accumulated 12,000 views. It was climbing rapidly. Vanessa was actively tagging mutual acquaintances, local socialites, and several prominent lifestyle bloggers she courted for social influence. The comments section scrolled at a dizzying pace, a blur of sympathetic emojis and outraged replies from strangers who consumed her fabricated victimhood without a single critical thought. She was spinning the narrative, positioning herself as the tragic casualty of a cyberbullying campaign. Maya crossed her arms, watching my face for a reaction. My maid of honor expected a resurgence of the furious, commanding bride who took the altar by storm. Instead, a cold, calculating calm settled over my features. Vanessa was attempting to win a digital war. She believed she could control the fallout by striking first in the virtual arena. She assumed her tears carried more weight than forensic data. This was her fundamental, catastrophic miscalculation. I run a crisis management agency. I mitigate reputational disasters for multinational corporations. I negotiate with hostile press syndicates. I dismantle coordinated smear campaigns before they reach the morning headlines. My sister was a frantic amateur, wielding a smartphone, trying to challenge a seasoned architect of public perception. She brought a knife to a drone strike, I murmured, handing the device back to Maya. Julian pushed through the corridor doors, finding us huddled over the glowing screen. He took one look at my serene expression and the phone in Maya's hand. He did not panic. The man who wept on the marble steps was gone, replaced by a partner ready to stand his ground. He listened to the looping audio of Vanessa's broadcast, his jaw locked into a familiar, rigid line. He looked at me, waiting for my command. "What is our countermeasure?" Julian asked, his voice steady. He used the word "our." We were a unified front. Vanessa wanted to play in the mud. She wanted to leverage public sympathy to salvage her burning reputation. She did not understand that I possessed the raw data, the security footage, the internet protocol logs, and the financial tracking documents proving her embezzlement. More importantly, she did not realize that by publishing a video accusing me of a cybercrime, she had just crossed the threshold from petty familial drama into actionable, malicious defamation. She was no longer just a toxic sibling acting out at a family event. She was a public liability broadcasting slander against a business owner. My parents were likely commenting on the post, enabling her delusion, assuming the digital distance protected them from my reach. They thought kicking them out of the building was my final move. They failed to realize I had not even begun to leverage my true power. The Monday following the ceremony arrived with clear blue skies over Chicago. Sunlight streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows of my penthouse. Julia Lyon stood in the center of our bedquay, carefully folding linen shirts into a vintage leather suitcase. We were scheduled to depart for our honeymoon in Greece later that evening. The Aegean Sea promised a sanctuary of white stucco architecture and sapphire waters. But before I could board a transatlantic flight and embrace the peace of the Mediterranean, I needed to secure the perimeter of my newly reclaimed life. I sat down at my heavy oak desk, opened my laptop, and navigated to the digital battleground. Vanessa possessed an audience of 12,000 strangers. Over the weekend, her fabricated broadcast had metastasized across various platforms. People who thrived on internet drama shared her tearful performance, tagging local news outlets and wedding industry blogs. I scrolled through the comments section beneath her original post. The responses were a predictable chorus of misguided sympathy from gullible viewers. However, The most damaging replies originated from two familiar accounts. My mother and my father were actively participating in the comment thread. Brenda typed long, rambling paragraphs detailing my supposed lifelong jealousy of my younger sibling. Richard validated his wife, claiming he only walked me down the aisle out of pity before my horrific behavior forced them to abandon the reception. They were constructing a unified front of deceit. They believed the virtual barrier shielded them from my authority. They assumed my eviction notice only applied to the physical premises of the event space. During my early 20s, I attempted to establish a freelance marketing portfolio. My parents routinely undermined my credibility. Whenever a mutual acquaintance inquired about my career, Richard would chuckle and describe my business as a cute little hobby. Brenda would sigh and lament my refusal to secure a stable, traditional corporate position like the one Vanessa pretended to hold. They specialized in diminishing my worth to elevate her status. They thought they could execute the exact same strategy online to sabotage my agency today. They failed to realize my cute little hobby was now a multi-million-dollar enterprise. I picked up my cell phone and dialed the direct line to my lead corporate counsel. His name was Arthur. He was a seasoned litigator who handled hostile takeovers and crisis containment for Fortune 500 companies. He answered on the second ring. I did not request a polite warning or a standard mediation letter. I requested a legal guillotine. I instructed him to draft the most severe cease and desist notice his firm had ever produced. We did not merely outline a demand for silence. We built an impenetrable fortress of documented facts. I forwarded Arthur the raw security feed from the fourth-floor corridor. I sent him the forensic network analysis Maya compiled, clearly linking the spoofed text messages to the router sitting in Vanessa's living room. Finally, I provided the banking records exposing the fraudulent shell corporation registered in Delaware. Arthur compiled the evidence into a devastating legal packet. He dispatched a private courier to my penthouse an hour later to acquire my physical signature. The documents rested inside thick, cream-colored envelopes bearing the embossed crest of Chicago's most feared litigation firm. The heavy paper felt like a weapon in my hands. The crisp, formal typography left zero room for interpretation or emotional manipulation. The primary document demanded the immediate removal of all defamatory content across every social network. It required a full retraction. But I knew a standard defamation threat would not deter individuals accustomed to twisting reality. To guarantee their permanent compliance, I needed to leverage a consequence they could not ignore, manipulate, or afford. I initiated a formal estrangement protocol. The contract explicitly barred Richard, Brenda, and Vanessa from contacting me, Julian, or any employees associated with my public relations firm. It established a rigid, legally binding boundary. To enforce this perimeter, I weaponized the $80,000 theft my sister committed against our father. The final page of the packet contained a customized ultimatum. If any member of my biological family violated the no-contact order, I would immediately submit the banking records to the Internal Revenue Service and the local district attorney. Vanessa did not just steal wedding funds. She committed wire fraud, tax evasion, and grand larceny by funneling the cash into an offshore account. If they uttered my name in public again, she would face federal prosecution. I signed the signature line with a smooth, decisive stroke of my pen. I handed the sealed cream-colored envelopes back to the courier. I instructed him to deliver the packets via certified mail, requiring a direct signature upon receipt. I wanted irrefutable proof that the poison had been served. I turned back to my laptop to execute the final maneuver. I drafted an internal press release for my agency, detailing a generic but firm stance against coordinated cyberbullying, linking to a secure server hosting the unedited hotel footage. I did not publish it. I simply kept it loaded in my outbox, a loaded gun waiting for a target. I tapped the send button on an email to my executive team, instructing them to ignore the noise and focus entirely on our clients. Julian walked up behind my desk chair. He placed his hands on my shoulders, his thumbs tracing the line of my collarbone. He watched the glowing screen, witnessing the systematic dismantling of a threat. He did not ask me to show mercy. He understood that mercy was a luxury afforded only to those who demonstrated remorse. My family had displayed none. 3 hours later, a notification chimed on my mobile device. The certified delivery service confirmed all 3 signatures. Richard, Brenda, and Vanessa were officially holding the evidence of their own destruction in their hands. I pictured them sitting in their respective living rooms, opening the premium envelopes and reading the clinical description of their incoming ruin. I refreshed the browser tab displaying my sister's social profile. The change occurred in real time. The viral video vanished. The comment sections disappeared. The defiant, manufactured bravery evaporated under the crushing weight of legal reality. A few seconds later, the entire account switched from public to private. My parents deactivated their own profiles shortly after. The silence that followed was immediate and profound. It was not the tense, waiting quiet of an active battlefield. It was the sterile, pristine emptiness of a surrendered territory. They finally realized the quiet girl they had spent a lifetime kicking down had evolved into an adversary they could not touch. The financial leverage, the forensic data, and the legal barricade proved insurmountable. They were trapped in a prison of their own design. I closed my laptop, the screen going dark. I stood up, turned around, and wrapped my arms around my husband. The war was won. The victory was secured. We could finally pack our bags and leave the ashes of my former life behind. Would you have sued your family to protect your peace? Or would you have just walked away and hoped for the best? Tell me your thoughts in the comments. I chose to build a wall they could never climb, but every action carries a ripple effect. The dust settled on our wedding weekend, but the ultimate resolution of this new reality was waiting for us 6 months down the road. It has been exactly 6 months since the wedding that almost did not happen. The morning air in Chicago carries a crisp, biting chill today. I'm standing on the wraparound balcony of our penthouse, wrapping both hands around a ceramic mug of dark roast coffee to absorb the heat. The city stretches out below me, an endless grid of steel and glass catching the early sunlight. The ambient hum of morning traffic drifts up from the streets, a steady, rhythmic reminder of life moving forward. The wind coming off Lake Michigan is sharp, but I feel nothing except a profound, settling warmth. Resting on the patio table beside me is a silver-framed photograph. It is not a traditional posed wedding portrait. It is a candid shot captured by our photographer during the exact moment Maya handed Julian and me those 2 crystal glasses of tequila at the altar. In the image, Julian is looking at me with a profound, unshakable reverence. My own face reflects a fierce, quiet peace. We look like 2 people who just survived a shipwreck and found solid ground. Going through the fire on day 1 of our marriage forged an unbreakable trust between us. The lingering shadows of Julian's past insecurities burned away entirely on that marble altar. He learned that genuine love requires defending your partner, even when the evidence seems terrifying. I learned that a man who owns his failures and publicly commits to growth is a man worth keeping. We do not keep secrets. We do not harbor unspoken doubts. Our foundation rests on total, unapologetic transparency, and we are happier than I ever thought possible. My professional life mirrored the upward trajectory of my personal life. Over the past 6 months, my public relations agency doubled in size and revenue. Corporate clients flock to a founder who demonstrates a lethal intolerance for nonsense. When a multinational technology firm faced a severe defamation crisis last autumn, their board of directors specifically requested my services. They heard whispers of an executive who dismantled a coordinated smear campaign on her own wedding day without breaking a sweat. They wanted that exact level of ruthless precision defending their brand. I command a premium rate, and I sleep perfectly soundly every night knowing I built my empire on my own terms. As for my biological relatives, the fallout from that Saturday morning was catastrophic and permanent. My father, Richard, spent his entire life avoiding confrontation. He preferred to throw money at his problems and look the other way. But the $80,000 void in his retirement account proved impossible to ignore. When he attempted to recover the funds from the Waverly Event Group Shell Corporation, the bank confirmed the money was gone. It was routed to an offshore account to cover Derek's lingering gambling debts and fund their illicit hotel rendezvous. The sheer audacity of the theft finally broke the spell my sister held over him. He realized Vanessa viewed him not as a father, but as a naive, unlimited, automated teller machine. He severed her financial pipeline the very next day. He canceled her credit cards, removed her name from his cellular plan, and revoked her access to the family trust. Vanessa expected our mother to swoop in and save her, just as Brenda had done 100 times before. But Brenda was paralyzed by her own social ruin. Greg did not just walk out of the historic bank and quietly cancel their engagement. He belonged to a highly influential old money family with deep roots in the East Coast financial sector. His parents possessed zero tolerance for public humiliation or deceit. They deployed their social influence with chilling efficiency. They ensured Vanessa was blacklisted from every country club, charity gala, and elite social circle in the city. The wealthy friends she spent years cultivating stopped answering her phone calls. The luxury boutiques where she used to flaunt Greg's platinum cards suddenly treated her like a stranger. Stripped of her funding and her social armor, Vanessa crashed into the harsh pavement of reality. She currently resides in a cramped, unrenovated studio apartment on the outskirts of the city. She works a minimum wage job as a receptionist at a mid-tier fitness center, fetching towels for the exact demographic of people she used to mock. She spends her days isolated and miserable, trapped in a prison constructed entirely by her own jealousy and greed. I did not destroy my sister's life. I simply handed her a high-definition mirror, and she could not handle the reflection staring back at her. My parents realized too late that they bet their legacy on a fraud. Last month, during the second week of December, the building concierge delivered a stack of holiday mail to my penthouse. Nestled between corporate gifts and invitations was a thick, foil-lined envelope bearing my mother's distinct, looping handwriting. It was a Christmas card. It was a pathetic, transparent attempt to sweep a lifetime of emotional abuse and a spectacular public betrayal under the rug. Brenda likely thought enough time had passed for my anger to cool. She assumed the holiday spirit would compel me to overlook the fact that she ripped up the forensic proof of my innocence and tried to bankrupt me on my wedding day. She wanted to resume playing the role of the happy matriarch without ever offering a genuine apology or accepting accountability. I did not open the envelope. I did not shed a tear. I walked over to my desk, picked up a thick red marker, and wrote "Return to Sender" across the front in bold block letters. I handed it back to the concierge the following morning. Setting boundaries is not a cruel act. Refusing to engage with toxic individuals does not make you a vindictive person. It is an act of pure self-preservation. You are not required to set yourself on fire simply to keep your abusers warm. For 29 years, I believed I was obligated to tolerate their cruelty because we shared a bloodline. I shrunk myself to fit into the tiny, insignificant box they assigned me. I watched them elevate a manipulative liar while ignoring every milestone I achieved. I thought family meant enduring pain in silence. I know better now. Family is not determined by DNA or matching last names. Family is defined by the people who stand shoulder to shoulder with you when the truth comes to light. Family is Maya spending her entire night tracing network protocol addresses to clear my name. Family is Julian's father, pulling me into a hug and telling me he is proud to have me in his ranks. Family is a partner who drops to his knees in front of 200 people to beg for your forgiveness and spends every day afterward proving he is worthy of your grace. If you are watching this and you are currently playing the role of the scapegoat in your own home, I need you to listen to me very carefully. You do not have to accept the narrative they wrote for you. You have the power to step off their stage and build your own theater. It is terrifying to walk away from the only dynamic you have ever known. The initial silence feels heavy, and the societal pressure to forgive and forget can feel suffocating. But the peace waiting for you on the other side of that boundary is worth every single uncomfortable step. You deserve to be surrounded by people who celebrate your victories instead of plotting your downfall. You deserve to be trusted, respected, and valued. Thank you for staying with me until the very end of this journey. Thank you for listening to my truth. If my story resonated with you, if you found a piece of your own struggle reflected in my words, please hit the subscribe button. Like this video to help it reach a wider audience. And most importantly, share it with someone in your life who needs to hear that it is okay to walk away from toxic people. Leave a comment below and tell me about the boundaries you have set to protect your own peace. I will be reading your responses. Until next time, know your worth.
We often believe that the greatest threats to our relationships come from the outside, a sudden tragedy, an unforeseen financial ruin, or an insurmountable physical distance. But as we unpack the profound unraveling of a wedding day destroyed by a single fabricated text message, we are forced to confront a much more insidious and quiet reality. The true test of love and loyalty does not reside in how we celebrate our highest peaks, but rather in how we navigate the suffocating darkness of a manufactured crisis. The story we just witnessed is more than a viral tale of a bride's spectacular vindication. It is a complex mirror reflecting the fractured dynamics of modern human connection. The overarching message is clear. The truth always exists, but our deeply ingrained beliefs and our knee-jerk reactions to a crisis ultimately determine the survival or the slaughter of our relationships. It forces us to ask terrifying questions about who we trust, how we love, and where we draw the boundaries with the people who share our blood. For young adults navigating the turbulent waters of modern romance and family ties, this narrative serves as a brutal masterclass in emotional survival. The first, and perhaps most glaring lesson, is the catastrophic danger of making monumental life decisions while drowning in the undertow of overwhelming emotion. When panic takes the wheel, logic is always the first casualty. A frantic midnight phone call has the power to permanently destroy a relationship if you do not take the time to verify the information presented to you. In our hyper-connected, modern society, where fake news, deepfakes, and psychological manipulation are alarmingly rampant, the ability to practice the pause, verify, then react methodology is no longer just good advice. It is a critical, non-negotiable survival skill. We are taught from a young age that trust is the bedrock of any lasting partnership. But this story violently amends that old adage. Trusting your loved one is absolutely necessary, but blindly believing in evidence provided by others simply because it confirms our deepest insecurities is a highly dangerous game. The lesson here is paramount. You must always check the source, the context, and the authenticity of the information before drawing a devastating conclusion. This highlights a painful truth about choosing a life partner. We often evaluate our significant others based solely on emotions and how they treat us during peaceful, sunlit days. But choosing a life partner shouldn't be based solely on emotions, but also on how they handle crises. How does your partner react when the world catches fire? The fiancé's devastating failure wasn't just that he believed a lie. His reaction revealed a major problem rooted in a fundamental lack of dialogue and trust. A lasting relationship must be rigorously tested in the dark of a crisis, not just celebrated during the good times. Furthermore, this saga redefines our modern relationship with technology. We often view the digital age as a landscape of surveillance, anxiety, and disconnection. Yet, in this scenario, cameras, raw data, and digital evidence transformed into an impenetrable shield against character assassination and slander. Technology can be a powerful tool to protect the truth. In the digital age, understanding and strategically using technology to protect yourself from manipulation is vitally important. But perhaps the most agonizing lesson for young adults is the realization that setting strict boundaries with biological family members is not just optional, it is an absolute necessity. Society conditions us to believe that our family will always be our safest harbor. But this story shatters that illusion, reminding us that family isn't always right or automatically on your side. Adults must learn how to draw clear, rigid lines in the sand to protect their personal lives, their mental health, and their chosen relationships from the toxic undertows of those who raised them. The generational trauma woven into this narrative offers an equally devastating curriculum for the older generation. At the heart of the family's implosion is the quiet, localized tragedy of favoritism, which can cause lasting, irreparable harm. When a mother instinctively sides with one daughter without bothering to verify the facts, she displays a blatant bias that destroys trust and severs family bonds forever. Parents are meant to be the supportive architects of a child's moral framework. They should be supportive, and they must not blindly interfere in their children's relationships or add fuel to the fire before knowing the actual truth. The sister's willingness to deliberately and maliciously sabotage another person's happiness does not exist in a vacuum. It is the direct, tragic consequence of a catastrophic failure in parenting, a glaring lack of education regarding honesty, the destructive nature of jealousy, and the heavy burden of personal responsibility for one's actions. Parents must actively teach their children about morality and responsibility. There is a specific, haunting cruelty in the mother's dismissive phrase, "Maybe it's for the best." Those 6 words reveal a chilling indifference and a profound lack of empathy. Parents must learn to truly listen to their children before concluding with holding judgment, especially during the defining, terrifying moments of their lives. Ultimately, a family home should function as a sanctuary designed to protect the truth, not a dark corner where deceit is hidden or distorted to maintain a fragile peace. If a family refuses to stand firmly on the side of the truth, they do not just lose a daughter, they ensure their children will lose faith not only in the family unit, but also in all future long-term relationships. We spend our lives building fortresses out of love, assuming the walls will hold when the storms arrive. For young people, the mandate is clear. They need to be highly discerning, rigorously verify information, and build relationships based on strong, unshakable trust. For parents, the plea is equally urgent. They must be fair, deeply understanding, and profoundly responsible in how they influence and shape their children's lives. If the complex, messy, and deeply human dynamics of this narrative struck a chord within your own life, or if you are currently navigating the difficult journey of setting boundaries with the people you love, please take a moment to subscribe, hit the like button, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Join our growing community over at Sophia Told Stories, where we continue to explore the intricate, often hidden truths of the lives we lead and the relationships that define us. We all like to think we would be the one standing tall at the altar, holding the undeniable proof, completely immune to the doubts and the noise of the people who were supposed to love us best. But when the lights go down and the phone rings in the dead of night, bringing the exact fear we've spent our whole lives running from, the line between the victim, the savior, and the accomplice begins to blur. We look at the frantic groom consumed by his own insecurities, the enabling mother blinded by her biases, the fleeing sister desperate for validation, and the bride who had to build her own cold armor just to survive her wedding day. And as we judge their failures and applaud their victories, a quiet, unsettling realization creeps into the most secret corners of our minds, forcing us to pause and think. This feels so much like me.